She had every luxury money could buy, and no one to catch her when she fell. He had almost nothing, and he still stopped to help a stranger in the rain. What happened next changed both their lives forever. This is a story about what real wealth looks like, and why the most powerful woman in the country fell for a delivery driver who never once asked for anything in return. If this story moves you, hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Follow along and don't stop until the very end. The rain started the way it always did in late October, without warning, without apology. One minute the sky was a dull charcoal gray, the kind that sat low over the city all afternoon without committing to anything. The next, it opened up completely, dumping water so hard it bounced off the asphalt in little white explosions and turned the gutters into fast-moving rivers. Logan Pierce pulled his delivery van to the curb on Meridian Avenue and sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel, watching sheets of rain drag across the windshield, and thought about how his daughter's rain boots were sitting in the hallway at home, which meant she was currently at Mrs. Delgado's place across the street with nothing waterproof on her feet, probably talking the woman's ear off about something she'd seen on TV. He exhaled, checked the route screen mounted on the dash, and grabbed the package from the back. 12 floors up, 1 unit, penthouse level. He'd delivered to the Alderton building twice before. Both times it had been standard stuff. Medical supplies, electronics, some kind of architectural drafting tube that had been a pain to carry. Both times the doorman had taken the package at the lobby desk, and that had been the end of it. But tonight the system had flagged the delivery as signature required, which meant he had to go up himself, wait for someone to open the door, scan the barcode against a real human face, and then get back downstairs before the rest of his route slipped too far behind. He wrapped the package in a sheet of plastic from the roll he kept behind the seat, a habit he'd picked up 2 years into the job, tucked it under one arm, and jogged through the rain toward the building entrance. The lobby was the kind of lobby that made Logan feel the particular discomfort of being the wrong kind of person in the right kind of place. Marble floors polished to a mirror finish. A ceiling so high you could lose a basketball up there. A floral arrangement on the center table that was taller than he was, and probably cost more than a week of his salary. He was dripping water onto the marble before he'd taken 3 steps. The doorman, a stocky man in his 50s named Carl, according to his nameplate, looked up from behind the desk and then looked back down at his monitor. "Delivery for the penthouse," Logan said, holding up the package. "Signature required." "You can leave it with me." "Can't. System's flagged for personal signature." Carl looked at him again, this time with the expression of someone deciding whether it was worth the argument. Apparently it wasn't. He picked up the phone receiver on his desk, dialed 2 digits, and waited. After a long pause, he hung up. "Nobody's answering the intercom," he said. "Package says it has to be signed tonight." Logan checked the time on his phone. "I can wait a few minutes if you want to try again." "Mom." Carl tried twice more over the next 5 minutes. Each time, nothing. "There's a staff entrance on the service elevator," Carl finally said. "Building manager usually lets drivers go up direct when there's no response and the flag's on the system. Let me call him." It took another 4 minutes, but eventually Logan was in a narrow elevator that smelled like industrial cleaner and machine oil, rising toward the 12th floor with the package under his arm and a scan confirmation code on his phone screen. The elevator opened into a service corridor. Plain gray walls, fluorescent lighting, the back-of-house reality behind all that marble and brass downstairs. He followed the numbers on the doors until the corridor ended at a single door marked PH. No unit number, just those 2 letters. He knocked. Waited. Knocked again. Harder. Nothing. He was about to pull up the delivery system on his phone to log a failed attempt when he heard it. A sound that didn't fit. Not silence, and not the muffled sound of someone ignoring a knock. It was something falling. A hard, flat impact from the other side of the door, the kind of sound a book makes when it drops off a shelf, except heavier. He stood still. Then it came again. Not a fall this time, but something dragging. A slow, uneven scrape. Logan knocked again. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I've got a delivery. I heard something fall." Silence. "Hello?" He tried the handle. It turned. The door wasn't locked. It had probably clicked open when the building manager cleared his elevator access, some kind of connected system he didn't fully understand. He pushed it open about 6 inches and leaned his head through. "Hello? I'm the delivery driver. I heard a noise. Is everything okay?" What he saw through the gap stopped him cold. The apartment was huge, the kind of space that belonged in a magazine, floor-to-ceiling glass on the far wall showing the entire rain-soaked city below. Lights blurred and running in the wet. But the living area was a wreck. Not the comfortable, lived-in kind of mess, but the chaotic debris of a person who'd been working at the edge of collapse for too long. There were 3 laptops open on the coffee table, all of them active, stacked documents and folders fanned across the floor. A glass of something had tipped over at some point. The liquid had dried into a faint ring on the hardwood. There were takeout containers on the kitchen counter, a blazer thrown over the back of a chair, 3 pairs of shoes scattered in a trail from the entrance toward the interior like they'd been kicked off during a walk. And on the floor beside the coffee table, half collapsed against the leg of the sofa, was a woman. She was on her side, one arm stretched forward, her dark hair spread out across the floor. She was dressed. Pencil skirt, silk blouse, like she'd been in meetings all day. And she was breathing. He could see her chest moving. But she wasn't conscious, or she was barely conscious. She wasn't responding to his voice. Logan dropped the package and crossed the room in about 4 steps. "Hey." He crouched beside her, not touching, just trying to get a look at her face. "Hey, can you hear me?" Up close, she looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. There were hollows under her eyes, and a tension still visible, even in her unconscious face, like her body hadn't fully let go of whatever had been driving her. Her wrist had knocked against the coffee table on the way down. He could see the beginnings of a bruise already forming there. "Hey." He put 2 fingers against the side of her neck. Pulse. Steady. Strong, actually. "I'm going to call an ambulance, okay? Can you hear me?" She stirred. Not a lot. Just a small, slow movement of her head against her arm. "Don't move. I'm going to call—" "No." Her voice was barely above a breath, but the word was clear. "No ambulance." "You're on the floor." "I know where I am." A pause. Her eyes opened and she looked at the ceiling first, then at him. Her gaze was unfocused for a second, then sharpened. "Who are you?" "Delivery driver. I knocked. I heard you fall. The door was unlocked." She blinked. Something moved behind her eyes that he couldn't read. Then she tried to push herself up and immediately stopped because clearly that hurt. "Easy," he said. "Take a second." "I'm fine." "You were on the floor." "I'm aware." She pressed her palm flat against the hardwood and tried again, more carefully this time. He reached out and held her elbow, not pulling, just steadying. And she let him, which he suspected was more of an admission than she would normally allow herself. She got to a sitting position and leaned back against the sofa, closing her eyes again. Her breathing was measured, deliberately slow, like she was talking herself down from something. "When did you eat last?" Logan asked. She didn't answer right away. "I'm not trying to be in your business," he said. You've got the signs. My daughter does this face when she's pushing through being hungry and tired at the same time. Yours is the adult version." She opened one eye. "You're comparing me to a 6-year-old. More like I'm saying I recognize what running on empty looks like." A silence settled between them. Outside, rain hit the glass in waves. "Yesterday," she said finally. "I ate yesterday. Sometime around noon. It's 9:30 at night." "I know what time it is." He looked at the kitchen counter. There was a half-empty box of crackers on top of the takeout containers. He stood up, went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water from the tap, and brought it back. She looked at it for a second like she was deciding whether to be annoyed, then took it and drank. "Thank you," she said, quietly, like the words cost something. "Is there someone I can call for you? Someone who can come stay?" "No." The word came out faster, and with more edge than she probably intended. She caught herself. "No, I'm fine. It was a bad day. I pushed too hard, and I didn't eat, and I stood up too fast. It happens." "Does it?" She looked at him then, really looked like she was measuring whether he was patronizing her or just asking a question. Not usually, she admitted. He stayed another 20 minutes. Not because she asked him to, she didn't. But he found a container of soup in the back of the refrigerator, heated it on the stove without asking permission, and set it on the coffee table in front of her. She ate it in silence, which he took as permission enough. He cleared some of the clutter from the coffee table to give her space, stacking documents carefully without reading them, and brought her the package from where he'd dropped it by the door. "You came up here for this," she said, looking at the label. "And then I heard you fall." She turned the package over in her hands but didn't open it. "You could have called building services." "I could have. Most people would have." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to tell anyone about this?" He wasn't sure if it was a question or an instruction. "No," he said. "Definitely not." She nodded slowly. Some of the rigidity had left her posture. Not much, but some, like a rope under too much tension that had been given a single inch of slack. When he stood to go, she said, "I don't know your name." "Logan." "Victoria," she said, and then appeared to notice something, a small flicker of reaction in herself, like she'd given more than she intended. "Thank you." "Logan." "Eat something tomorrow," he said. He picked up his scan pad from the counter where he'd set it, logged the delivery, and let himself out through the service corridor the way he'd come. By the time he got back to the lobby, his phone was showing 4 route updates and a message from Mrs. Delgado saying Maisie had talked her into making grilled cheese, and was she allowed to have a second one. He replied yes, please, and thanks, and pushed out through the lobby doors into the rain. He didn't think about her much on the rest of the route. He had 8 more stops and a flooded section of Harner Street to navigate around, and a daughter to get home and bathed and settled before 10. Life didn't pause to let you sit with moments. It was only later, after Maisie was asleep with her hair still slightly damp and the rain had slowed to a quiet drizzle against the window, that Logan sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and thought about what the woman's face had looked like when she'd said thank you. Not the polished, automatic thank you that people in expensive apartments gave delivery drivers. Something else. Something that looked like it had climbed up through years of keeping everything at a controlled distance before it made it out of her mouth. He didn't think anything of it exactly. He was tired, and his lower back was aching the way it always did after a full route in wet weather, and he had to be up at 5:30. He rinsed the cup, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Logan Pierce's life had a particular rhythm to it, the kind that looked exhausting from the outside and simply was what it was from the inside. 5:30 wake up. Shower if Maisie was still asleep. Start the coffee. If she was already awake, which happened more than it didn't, because his daughter had apparently inherited none of his capacity for sleeping past sunrise, then it was cartoons on the tablet at low volume while he moved around the kitchen assembling breakfast from whatever was in the refrigerator. Eggs mostly, toast, the occasional bowl of cereal on days when he'd miscalculated the grocery run. He'd been doing it this way for 4 years. Since Maisie was 2, since her mother had sat across from him at that same kitchen table and told him that she loved him, but she couldn't do this life, and that she thought he could manage better than he probably believed he could, and that she hoped he'd understand someday. He hadn't understood, not for a long time. But he'd kept the kitchen running, kept Maisie fed and clean and loved, and over 4 years of doing it, one morning at a time, something that had started as panic had turned into the only structure he knew how to trust. The apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building on Cassidy Street, the kind of neighborhood that was always described as transitional by people who didn't live there, and home by the people who did. The walls in the hallway still had the marks from where the previous tenant had taken down shelving, and the kitchen tiles had a crack running from the baseboard heater to the cabinet that the landlord had been promising to fix since the spring. Maisie had decided the crack looked like a river, and had drawn a small fish at one end of it in washable marker that had turned out not to be very washable. Logan had left the fish. It made her happy, every morning. He drove for Northline Logistics, third-party contracted through a handful of e-commerce companies, which meant his hours were his own to manage. But his income was a function of completed routes and package volume and tips that were technically not part of the service but happened anyway from the kinds of buildings where people had the mental space to think about tipping their delivery driver. The Alderton building, historically, had not been one of those places. He thought about that sometimes. The geography of tips. The modest apartment buildings on the east side of the city tipped more reliably than the expensive ones. He'd worked out a theory about it once and then decided the theory was probably depressing and let it go. The morning after the penthouse was a Tuesday. He picked up his route manifest at 7, loaded the van, and was on the road before 7:30. Maisie was with Mrs. Delgado again, a semi-formal arrangement that had evolved from emergency childcare into something closer to a standing daily commitment, one that Logan paid for with grocery runs and small cash payments, and the occasional repair job that Mrs. Delgado refused to hire out. Her husband had passed 3 years ago, and the arrangement worked for both of them in ways neither of them talked about directly. His Tuesday route kept him on the north side of the city, which meant no Alderton, no Meridian Avenue, no penthouse. He made 19 deliveries, ate a sandwich in the van around 12:30, and had the van returned to the depot by 4:15, which gave him time to pick up Maisie and stop at the grocery store on the way home. Maisie had opinions about the grocery store. Specifically, she had opinions about the cereal aisle and the placement of the fruit snacks relative to things Logan was actually willing to buy, and about the injustice of him vetoing the kind of yogurt that came with its own candy for mixing in. She made these opinions known in a running commentary that lasted from the entrance to the checkout, occasionally pausing to ask detailed questions about why various items existed on shelves if they were not available to her. "Because they're for other people," Logan said, for the third time, steering the cart past the cereal. "What people?" "People who made different choices." She considered this for a moment. "I want to make different choices." "You can, when you buy your own cereal." "When will that be?" "Longer than you want." She accepted this with the philosophical resignation of someone who had learned that some arguments had no available victories and moved on to asking about the kind of pasta that came shaped like dinosaurs. He said yes to the pasta. It was a small thing. The small things mattered. Benchit. The following Saturday, Logan had a routine. It wasn't elaborate. Routines didn't have to be, to mean something. Saturday mornings were for the laundromat, which was 3 blocks from their building and had a corner with a low table and some books that someone had left there years ago and that Maisie had quietly adopted as her personal library. Then lunch, usually at Birch and Brew, a small cafe on Clement Street that had good coffee and an owner named Rosa who didn't mind that a 6-year-old occasionally commandeered one of the window booths for an hour. Logan had been coming to Birch and Brew on Saturdays for almost 2 years. He liked it because it was the kind of place that didn't perform being cozy. It just was, through accumulated years of secondhand furniture and a specific quality of afternoon light that came through the south window around noon and turned everything a particular shade of amber. Rosa made strong coffee and played old jazz at a volume that felt like weather rather than background noise. He and Maisie were in the window booth at just after 12 when the woman came in. He almost didn't look up. He was in the middle of helping Maisie draw a horse on the back of a paper menu, an activity she'd requested with complete confidence, and that Logan was executing with the skill of someone who could manage delivery routes and basic home repair, but had never been able to draw a horse that didn't look like a slightly confident dog. "That's his nose," Maisie said, pointing at the circle Logan had drawn. "That's absolutely his nose, yeah. It looks like a potato. Horses have big noses. Not potato noses." He heard the bell above the door, heard footsteps, heard Rosa saying welcome back, the usual, and then the sound of someone settling into the booth 2 tables over. Standard Saturday traffic. He went back to the horse's potato nose. But 10 minutes later, when he went up to the counter to get a refill, he turned around and saw her. The recognition was slow. It took him a full 2 seconds to place her, which was probably because she looked completely different. No pencil skirt, no blazer, none of the polished wreckage of the previous week. She was in a gray hoodie and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a loose knot. She had her hands around a mug and was looking out the window with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite making it. She was also very clearly hoping no one would look at her twice. Logan carried his refill back to the booth, sat down, and went back to the horse. Maisie had improved the nose with a series of small lines that she said were nostrils. "That's better," he said. "I know." He could see the woman from his peripheral vision without turning his head. She ordered something from Rosa and sat with her phone face down on the table, which he'd noticed was a thing people did when they were trying to resist checking it. He did it himself sometimes, on the nights when he'd managed to get Maisie to sleep at a reasonable hour and wanted to feel like the rest of the evening belonged to him. He didn't say anything. He wasn't going to. It wasn't his place, and even if part of him was curious about how she was doing, there was a version of that curiosity that would turn into something uncomfortable for her, and he had enough social sense to know it. But then Maisie, because she was 6 years old and had not yet developed any kind of social governor, leaned around the edge of the booth and said, loudly and with zero preamble, "Do you like horses?" A pause from the other table. Logan kept his eyes down. "Maisie, I'm asking because Dad drew one and it doesn't look right." He looked up because there was nothing else to do and found the woman already looking back. Her expression had shifted. The neutral mask had cracked, very slightly, in the direction of something that might become amusement. "Can I see?" she said. Maisie slid out of the booth and carried the paper menu over with the solemnity of someone presenting evidence. The woman looked at the drawing for a moment, then looked at Logan with something that was absolutely amusement now, controlled but visible. "It's a noble animal," she said. "It's supposed to have a real nose," Maisie said. "He made it a potato." "Horses do have large noses." She pointed to the face of the drawing. "If you make this line here curve out a little more, it'll look more like a real muzzle. Here, do you have the pen?" Maisie handed it over without hesitation. Another 6-year-old social instinct, trusting people who seemed to know what they were talking about. The woman made 2 small adjustments to the drawing, quick and precise, and handed it back. Maisie looked at it. "That's better," she said, with the same tone she'd used about her own nostrils. Then she climbed back into the booth. The woman glanced at Logan across the cafe. "Better," he agreed. She turned back to her window. Something had shifted in her posture, barely, but he noticed it, that same fractional release of tension he'd seen before, the rope giving an inch. He didn't push it. He finished his coffee and got through 3 more rounds of Maisie's questions about what horses ate and whether they liked being ridden and whether they could tell when you were scared of them. And by the time they were pulling on their jackets to leave, he had mostly stopped thinking about the woman at the other table. Mostly. "She was nice," Maisie said on the walk back to the laundromat. "She helped with the drawing," Logan said. "She could come back and help with the legs. The legs are going to be hard." "We'll figure out the legs," he said. But the woman was there the following Saturday. Same table, same gray hoodie, or one that looked nearly identical. Rosa gave her what appeared to be a regular order without being asked. She had a book this time, a real one, paperback, spine cracked from use, and she read it with the focused attention of someone who spent most of their time being interrupted and was taking the quiet like medicine. She and Logan exchanged a nod when he came in. That was all. The Saturday after that, Maisie finished her hot chocolate and wandered over to the other table to show the woman a drawing she'd done at school, a narwhal with an impressively realized horn and a series of small fish around it that the woman studied with apparent seriousness. She asked Maisie what the fish's names were. Maisie had answers for all of them. Logan watched his daughter conduct a 10-minute conversation about undersea life with a stranger in a gray hoodie and thought that Maisie's complete absence of social fear was either a gift or going to cause him serious trouble in her teenage years, possibly both. He caught the woman's eye over Maisie's head. "She's going to petition me for a fish tank by next week," he said. "They're more work than they look," the woman said. "Everything is." A brief, quiet laugh. The kind that sounds surprised, like it got out before she could decide whether she meant to share it. She covered it by taking a sip of her coffee. The next Saturday, she introduced herself as V. Logan shook her hand and said Logan, and Maisie said her name was Maisie, and she was 6 3/4 and could do her own shoelaces. "That's a significant skill at any age," V said, with perfect seriousness. Maisie accepted this as the obvious truth it was, and showed her the rest of the narwhal drawing. What began was not a friendship exactly, or it was, but it didn't arrive with a label. It arrived in the same way that most real things do, through accumulation. Saturday after Saturday at Birch and Brew, 20 minutes here, 40 minutes there. V was contained but not closed. There was a precision to how much of herself she offered, like someone who'd learned to measure portions carefully. She asked questions more than she answered them. She listened in a way that was rarer than it should be, that full attention kind of listening that made you feel like what you were saying was worth the air it took to say it. Logan told her, in pieces spread across weeks, about the route, about Maisie, about the way he planned his Saturdays specifically, so that Maisie had the experience of a routine that felt steady, even when the rest of the week was a controlled scramble. He told her about the crack in the kitchen tile shaped like a river, and the fish that Maisie had drawn that wouldn't come off. She laughed at the fish, and a real one, longer than the surprised ones. She told him she worked in tech. He didn't ask for specifics. She was clearly intelligent, clearly used to operating in a world that moved fast and demanded things of her constantly. And she spoke about work with the tired affection of someone who was good at something and no longer entirely sure they wanted to be. "Do you like it?" he asked once. She thought about it longer than the question probably required. "I like building things," she said. "I'm not sure I like everything that comes with it." "Like what?" "Politics. The parts that aren't about the work." He nodded. He knew something about that, just in a different key. Yeah. What he didn't know, what he had no reason to know, was that Victoria Sinclair had more search results than he could read in a week. That her company, Vertex Innovations, was worth somewhere north of $4 billion, and had just completed a funding round that made the front page of every business publication in the country. That the board meeting she'd mentioned once, in passing, as something that had gone badly, had in fact been a near coup orchestrated by her own CFO, who had spent 6 months building a case with 3 board members to force her out of operational control of the company she'd started from nothing at 23. He didn't know that V, sitting across from him with a cracked spine paperback and a regular coffee order, was on the front page of Forbes. He knew only that she was the most self-possessed person he'd spent time around in years, and that she had a way of being present in a conversation that was so uncommon it had started to feel like something he looked forward to in a way he was still figuring out. Well, it was Maisie who changed things, though she didn't mean to. The 4th Saturday in November was cold enough that Birch and Brew had its windows fogged from the inside, and Rosa had put a small space heater near the window booths that made the whole corner feel like the warmest square footage in the city. Maisie had a cup of cocoa and was working on a drawing she wouldn't let Logan see, which meant it was either very good or for him specifically. V was already there when they arrived, and she'd saved their booth. Not explicitly, no bag on the seat, but she'd taken the table next to it and turned slightly so that it was obvious she was leaving the window booth available. Logan noticed this and didn't say anything about it. About 40 minutes in, Maisie slid her drawing across the table. It was the 3 of them. Recognizably, Logan was the tallest figure, lanky and accurate, with a delivery uniform she'd rendered in brown crayon. V was beside him, smaller but with the same dark pulled-back hair, and between them was Maisie herself, holding both of their hands. Logan looked at it for a moment. V was looking at it too, from her angle at the next table. Her face was doing something difficult to read, not closed, but not entirely open either. Something in between, something that looked like it was taking up a lot of space internally and not being allowed out. "You're all here," Logan said, because Maisie seemed to be waiting for a response. "Because we all come on Saturdays," Maisie said, with the reasonable confidence of someone who had made a clear and obvious observation. "Except V has to be in the middle because she drew the horse's nose right, and that was important." Logan looked up at V. V was looking at the drawing. "Can I keep it?" she asked. Her voice was careful, the way careful voices get when there's more behind them than they're willing to carry into the room. "Yes," Maisie said, like it was obvious. "I made it for you." Something moved in V's expression then, just for a second, just a single unguarded moment, the kind that happens when something gets through before you can redirect it. She folded the drawing once along a careful crease and put it inside the book she'd been reading. Logan watched her do this and thought about what it must feel like to have a child hand you something small that they made specifically for you and to put it somewhere safe without even deciding to, just by instinct. He thought about it for the rest of that Saturday and the week after, and he was still thinking about some version of it the following Tuesday when his phone rang mid-route with a number he didn't recognize and a voice on the other end that he recognized immediately and that stopped him completely cold. "Logan?" A pause. "This is Victoria. From the, "I know who you are," he said. A longer pause. "I need to tell you something," she said, "before someone else does." He pulled the van to the curb and turned off the engine. "I'm listening," he said. And that was when everything that had been building under the surface for 6 quiet Saturdays in a window booth came up into the light, and nothing about either of their lives was quite the same after that. The call lasted 22 minutes. She told him who she was in a single sentence, the way you pull a bandage, fast and without preamble. Victoria Sinclair, Vertex Innovations. He could look her up, she said, and she knew he would, and she wanted him to hear it from her first before he did. He sat in the parked van on Hollis Street with the heat running and his manifest sitting ignored in the passenger seat and said nothing for a moment. "The penthouse," he said finally. "Yes." "And the cafe." "Yes." "You knew who I was the whole time." "After the first Saturday, yes." He absorbed this. It was strange. Not betrayed exactly, because she'd never said anything false. She'd just said less than the whole truth. But there was something in the space where complete honesty should have been that felt slightly airless. "Why?" he asked. A long pause. "Because you were the first person in a long time who talked to me like I was just a person. And I didn't want that to change." He didn't have an answer to that. Not right away. He looked out through the windshield at the street. A woman walking a dog. A kid on a scooter cutting too close to the curb. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon motion of a city full of ordinary people. "Okay," he said. "Okay? I'm not angry. I need to think about it. But I'm not angry." Another pause. "Most people would be?" "Most people probably would," he agreed. "I'll call you back." He did call back. 2 days later, after he'd spent the intervening time doing exactly what she'd said he would, which was looking her up. He looked her up extensively. He read 4 different profiles and 2 news pieces, and the piece from last month about the board crisis, which had more context now that he was reading it, knowing he'd been sitting across from her every Saturday for 6 weeks. He looked at photos of her at conferences and events, the full professional presentation, the version of her that was on stages and in boardrooms and on the covers of things, and then he thought about her in a gray hoodie reading a cracked spine paperback and realized that both of those people were real. That wasn't a performance, either one. They were just different surfaces of the same person, and maybe the cafe version was the one she almost never let herself be. He called her back on Thursday evening after Maisie was in bed. "Still not angry," he said when she answered. "I believe you," she said. "I'm not sure why." "Because I'm not really a complicated person." He settled back in the kitchen chair. "You were trying to have one thing that was simple. I get that. It wasn't supposed to become—" She stopped. "What?" "What it became," she said, carefully. He sat with that for a second. Outside, rain had started again, lighter than October, the first cold weather rain of November, tapping at the kitchen window. "Maisie's going to ask about you on Saturday," he said. "I know. She doesn't care about any of it, just so you know." A sound from the other end that he recognized. That small, controlled laugh that got out before she decided whether to share it. "She told me once that her fish drawing is still on the tile," V said. She was very pleased about that. "She's hard to argue with." "I noticed." He didn't suggest she come Saturday, or that they figure out what this was, or any of the things that the situation technically warranted. He just said goodnight, and she said goodnight, and he sat for a while in the kitchen in the quiet rain and didn't try to name what he was feeling. Maisie had her fish, drawn on the tile, that wouldn't come off. Some things were just there, and you left them. The Saturday after the phone call, Logan arrived at Birch and Brew 10 minutes later than usual because Maisie had changed her shoes 3 times. A phenomenon that had no discernible logic, but that he'd learned not to fight, because fighting it added another 10 minutes, and also a bad mood that would last until the hot chocolate arrived. V was already there. Same booth, same coffee order, same gray hoodie. He was fairly certain by this point that she owned multiples of the same one, either because she found something she liked and bought it in quantity, or because she genuinely didn't think about it, which, given everything he now knew about her schedule, was entirely possible. She had her book open, but she wasn't reading it. She looked up when they came through the door, and there was a half second where her expression didn't quite know what to do with itself before it settled into something careful and steady. Logan nodded at her. Maisie cut straight past him and climbed into the window booth. "I have a new drawing," Maisie announced. "It's a whale, a blue one. They're the biggest animal that ever lived, even bigger than dinosaurs." "I know," V said, turning slightly in her chair. "Their hearts are the size of a small car." Maisie looked at her with the concentrated respect she reserved for people who knew things she hadn't expected them to know. "How do you know that?" "I read a lot. Dad reads, but he doesn't know whale hearts." "I read about different things," Logan said, hanging his jacket on the hook by the booth. He looked at V. "Hi." "Hi," she said. That was all, for the first few minutes. Rosa brought Maisie's hot chocolate with the small marshmallows she always put in without being asked, and Logan's coffee, and the Saturday settled back into its shape like it always did. The jazz at low volume, the south window light, the slow, comfortable noise of a cafe in no particular hurry. Maisie produced the whale drawing and delivered a lecture on blue whale anatomy that she appeared to have memorized from a library book, and V listened to all of it with that same full attention listening that Logan had noticed months ago, the kind that couldn't be faked because kids knew instantly when it was. When Maisie went to the counter to ask Rosa if the marshmallows came in different shapes, a conversation that Logan knew from experience could take a while, V put her book down and looked at him. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I said I would." "People say things." "Yeah, but I meant it." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I thought about it a lot this week. What you said about wanting one thing that was simple." She waited. "I get it," he said. "I'm not going to pretend I would have handled it the exact same way, but I get it." She looked at the table for a moment. "I was going to tell you. I kept not finding the right time, and then it had been long enough that not telling you felt like its own problem." "It had been long enough," he agreed. "But here we are." "Here we are?" A pause. "Logan, I want you to know what I said about it being simple. I wasn't trying to use you as some kind of escape. It was more that you were the only place where I wasn't." She stopped, found a different approach. "Everyone around me knows exactly what I'm worth, down to the decimal, and they file everything I say and do against it. Every conversation has a direction. You were just talking to me." He thought about the Tuesday evenings when she'd call after Maisie was in bed, a pattern that had started after the Thursday call and had happened 3 more times in the weeks since, loosely scheduled around nothing in particular, just when the evening had enough quiet in it. They talked about ordinary things, her company's new infrastructure project, which she described with a mix of pride and exhaustion that he recognized. Maisie's latest obsession, which had moved from whales to volcanoes with the swift editorial decisiveness of a 6-year-old, the specific frustration of a kitchen tile that the landlord had now promised to fix twice and hadn't. The conversations had the particular ease of talking to someone you don't have to perform for, and he'd thought about that ease without fully naming why it felt unusual. Now he could name it. She had no angle. She wasn't filing him against anything. "For what it's worth," he said, "I was just talking to you too." She looked up at that. Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, not into anything you could easily describe. Just a small change in the quality of her expression, like a window with the latch loosened. Maisie came back from the counter carrying the information that Rosa did have star-shaped marshmallows, but they were only for special orders, which she viewed as an injustice worth documenting. She climbed back into the booth and began explaining the injustice in detail, and the moment between Logan and V folded back into the ordinary Saturday, and that was fine. Some things didn't need to be pressed or examined, they just needed to be allowed to continue. What continued over the following weeks was something that moved the way certain things move, without announcement, in the gaps between other things, accumulating gradually until one day you look up and it's simply there. V started arriving at Birch and Brew before them and leaving after. She remembered details without being asked, that Maisie had a thing about the table being level because the cafe floor wasn't quite even and it made her hot chocolate rock, so V had started folding a napkin and putting it under the short leg before they arrived. Small thing. Logan noticed it without saying anything the first time. The second time he noticed it, he said thank you, and she said it was nothing, and they both knew it wasn't nothing. Logan, for his part, started saving Maisie's drawings. Not in a pile. He'd always kept the ones Maisie declared important, but the ones that featured V in any way, which had become a consistent subgenre. There was the original three figures holding hands 1. There was a subsequent one featuring V's horse nose correction technique, which Maisie had labeled V nose horses in her unpredictable spelling. There was a whale drawing in which V appeared as a small figure standing beside the whale for scale, holding what was apparently a book. Logan kept them in a folder in the kitchen drawer. He told himself it was because Maisie might want them someday. This was probably partly true. He also started noticing things about V that he hadn't let himself notice before, or had noticed but not labeled. The way she carried herself differently in the cafe than he imagined she did elsewhere. The boardroom version of Victoria Sinclair he'd seen in photographs had a particular way of taking up space that was entirely intentional, a kind of controlled authority. The Birch and Brew version sat smaller, curved slightly over her coffee cup, shoulders not entirely relaxed, but getting there. The difference between those two postures told him something about what the cafe meant to her that she probably would not have put into words directly. He noticed that she drank her coffee without sugar, which she said was because she'd given it up 3 years ago and still didn't like it plain, but had forgotten how to go back. He noticed that she sometimes started sentences and then rerouted mid-word, like she was filtering in real time, and that over the weeks that rerouting happened less and less. He noticed that she was funnier than she let on, dry, deadpan, delivering things with a straight face that took him a beat to catch up to, and that when he did catch up, she'd look at him with a small, satisfied expression, like she'd been waiting. He noticed all of this and kept it to himself, not because there was anything to hide, but because some things need time to settle before you know what they are. December arrived in the city with the particular personality that December always had, cold enough to justify the lights that went up everywhere, not cold enough to be purely miserable. The whole month wrapped in a kind of collective permission to slow down that never quite materialized, but that people believed in anyway. Maisie had views about the Christmas lights in the neighborhood and about which buildings had gotten it right and which ones had made poor choices, delivered with the confidence of a 6-year-old design critic. On the second Saturday of December, Logan arrived to find V at the window booth, not her usual table, the window booth itself, the one he and Maisie always took. She'd moved, she had her coffee and her book, and she'd folded the napkin under the short table leg herself, and she was sitting in Maisie's usual side, leaving Logan's side free. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. Maisie texted me that you were coming from the other direction today and that you should sit first because she wants the counter view. Maisie texted you, Logan said. On your phone. Apparently she has a system. He looked down at his phone. There was, in fact, a text from his own number. Maisie had sent it from the back seat, apparently, while he was driving. Hi V, it's Maisie. Dad should sit first because I want to see if Rosa puts the stars on today. Followed by a whale emoji. Logan stood there for a second on the threshold of Birch and Brew with the cold December air at his back, looking at the text from his own phone sent by his 6-year-old to this woman, and felt something shift in his chest that he wasn't sure he had a precise word for. He sat down across from V. Maisie came through the door 30 seconds later, took one look at the seating arrangement, nodded in satisfaction, and installed herself at the counter to conduct surveillance on the marshmallow situation. She's something, V said. Every day, Logan agreed. They sat for a moment, the two of them, in the booth that was usually his and his daughter's, and the Saturday light came through the south window at its amber angle, and Rosa put on a different record, something slower, something with a piano in it, and V's book sat closed on the table, which it did more and more often now. Can I ask you something? Logan said. Okay. What actually happened in October, the board thing? She was quiet for a moment, not closed, more like she was deciding how much of the architecture to show him. My CFO, she said, Marcus Hale. He'd been building a case with 3 board members for about 6 months. The argument was that I was too operationally focused, that Vertex needed to shift toward a more traditional executive structure, that I should become a figurehead chairman position while a CEO brought in from outside ran the company. Your own company. The company I started at 23 with $80,000 I borrowed from my mother and didn't pay back until 3 years later. She said it without heat. The heat had been burned off, Logan thought, replaced with something harder and colder. The night you found me was the night I got the briefing document, the one they'd prepared for the full board meeting. It was 62 pages long. I read all of it. And then you passed out. I didn't. She stopped. I sat down too fast. My blood pressure dropped. Because you hadn't eaten since noon and you'd been reading a 62-page betrayal document. A pause. When you say it like that, I'm saying it accurately. She turned her coffee cup in both hands, a gesture he recognized as something she did when she was working through what to say next. The thing about Marcus, she said, is that I trusted him. I hired him. I brought him in 4 years ago because I needed someone who understood the financial side of scaling, and he was good at it. He was genuinely good at it. A beat. That's the part that makes the 62 pages worse. Not that he tried it, that he spent 4 years being good at his job while also building the scaffolding to take mine. Did you see it coming at all? Small things. Things I filed away as normal friction. She shook her head slightly. I'm usually good at reading rooms. I missed this one. Logan thought about what that cost her. Not professionally, but personally. The specific damage of being wrong about someone you'd chosen to trust. What happened after? He asked. I didn't sleep. I spent the next 3 days rebuilding the financial records Marcus had used in the document and finding the places where he'd framed things selectively. There are 3. Significant ones. She paused. The board meeting is in February. I'll be ready. You're going to go in there and take him apart. Methodically. He looked at her. She said it with absolute calm. No performance, no drama, just the quiet certainty of someone who had processed the anger down to fuel. Good, he said. She looked back at him, and something in her expression registered that. Not gratitude exactly, more like recognition, like she'd been expecting some version of, "Are you sure?" or "Be careful," and had gotten something different. Most people tell me to be strategic, she said, to play the long game, not to move until I have everything. You're already doing all of that. I know. So you don't need me to say it. No, she agreed. I don't. Maisie arrived back at the table with the news that the stars were not available today, but that Rosa had promised they would be next Saturday, and she had gotten this promise confirmed by pointing to the calendar behind the counter, so it was official. She climbed into her seat and picked up her hot chocolate and said, with the particular tone of someone making a casual observation that was not casual, "You two were talking for a long time." "We were," Logan said. "About work stuff?" "Some." Maisie considered this. "V looks less tired today." V blinked. She had tired eyes before, Maisie explained to both of them, with the unbothered authority of someone reporting observable facts. "They're better now." There was a beat of silence. "Thank you," V said, quietly. "You're welcome," Maisie said, and went back to her hot chocolate. The thing about Maisie, the thing Logan had learned to both depend on and occasionally brace for, was that she noticed everything and had not yet learned that noticing everything out loud was something adults typically trained themselves out of. She wasn't cruel about it. She was just clear. She said what she saw. In a world where most people said half of what they meant and none of what they saw, his daughter moved through rooms like a small, honest light, and sometimes that illuminated things that the adults in the vicinity would have preferred to process on their own timeline. Logan watched V's face after Maisie's observation and saw something that was not quite grief and not quite longing, something that lived in the space between those things, the specific ache of realizing you've been seen by someone who has no idea how rare it is to be seen that way. He looked down at his own coffee. Outside, the December light had gone flat and gray, and the street was filling with people doing Saturday things. Shopping bags and strollers, and a woman arguing cheerfully on her phone. And inside Birch and Brew, Rosa's piano record played on, and the booth they were all sitting in felt like the warmest square footage in the city. The weeks between that December Saturday and Christmas had a quality that Logan couldn't entirely account for in practical terms. His route volume picked up. The pre-holiday surge that added 30% to his package count and ate into every margin of his schedule. He was getting home later, eating dinner with Maisie at 6:30 instead of 6, logging his manifests while she finished whatever library book was in rotation, falling asleep on the couch more nights than he wanted to admit. The apartment got its first ever Christmas lights, courtesy of Maisie's strong opinions about the window, and Logan had spent 40 minutes on a ladder he'd borrowed from the building super getting them positioned to her exact specifications. In the middle of all of this, V was also there, not in a way that asked anything of him, but in the particular presence of someone who had quietly become part of the texture of the week. The Tuesday evening calls continued. Sometimes they lasted an hour. Once they lasted 20 minutes because Maisie had woken up with a bad dream and Logan had to go, and V had said go, and that was that. No friction. There was a running thing about the tile crack. She'd looked up the specific type of repair required and texted him the information with a link to the correct compound, which he'd bought and which was now sitting on the kitchen counter because he hadn't had a free Saturday to use it yet. She didn't follow up about it. She just sent the information and let him handle it on his own timeline, which was the kind of respect that was rarer than it should be. He also noticed, he couldn't help noticing, that she never asked him for anything. Not directly, not in the careful, oblique way that some people used when they were too proud to ask directly. She just didn't ask, which would have been easy to read as self-sufficiency, except that Logan had spent enough time around people who didn't ask because they'd learned that asking led nowhere to know the difference. He mentioned this, obliquely, on a Tuesday evening in mid-December, while Maisie was in bed and he was doing dishes. "You never ask for help with anything," he said. A pause on the other end. "Is that a criticism?" "No, more like an observation." "I have staff," she said. "If I need something handled, that's not what I mean. I mean the other kind of help, the kind where you just tell someone you're struggling." A longer pause. "I told you about Marcus," she said finally, after I asked. "That counts. Sort of." He set a glass in the drying rack. "I just noticed that you're very good at making yourself hard to worry about. That's generally considered a feature." "By who?" She didn't answer right away. He could hear a faint sound in the background, what might have been traffic, or a window open somewhere high up. "My mother used to say I came out self-contained," she said. Like it was a compliment. Parents say things. She meant it as one. She's a practical woman, not a lot of softness to spare. She was proud of the self-containment. A beat. I think I just internalized the pride without examining whether it was a healthy thing to be proud of. He finished the dishes and dried his hands and sat at the kitchen table with the phone. The fish on the tile was gone. He'd finally made the repair 2 weeks ago, and Maisie had immediately drawn a new fish, larger, with what she called a more confident expression. The new fish was still there. "For what it's worth," Logan said, "you're not that hard to worry about." Another pause, and then she laughed. A real one, not the controlled kind, not the surprised kind that got out before she decided whether to share it. A full one, loose and genuine, and he sat in the kitchen with that sound in his ear and thought, there it is. There's the person that lives behind all the rest of it. "That's not a compliment," she said, still with the residue of the laugh in her voice. "Kind of is." "Explain how." "It means I can see you. The actual you, not the managed version." A silence settled on the line. The warm kind. The kind that isn't empty. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I'm not good at this." "At what?" "Whatever this is." A breath. "I'm good at a lot of things. I'm good at reading markets and building systems and knowing when someone in a room is lying. I'm not good at—" She found the word slowly. "Depending." "You don't have to be good at it. You just have to let it happen." She was quiet for a moment. "That's harder," she said. "I know," he said. "But you're doing it anyway." He heard her breathe. Not a sigh, not dramatic, just a breath, the way you breathe when something heavy moves an inch. "Good night, Logan." "Good night, V." He sat at the table after the call and looked at the new confident fish for a while. The apartment was quiet. Maisie's quiet, the particular settled stillness of a place where a child has finally gone to sleep and taken all the noise with her. Outside, December was being December. A distant car horn. the occasional creak of the building adjusting to the cold. He sat there and thought about what she'd said. Whatever this is. He turned the phrase over carefully, the way you handle something you're not sure of yet, checking the weight and the temperature. He knew what it was. He'd known for a few weeks, if he was being honest with himself. He just hadn't done anything with that knowledge yet, because there were 100 ways it could go sideways and exactly 0 roads from a delivery driver on Cassidy Street to a woman whose company was worth $4 billion that didn't have some serious terrain in the middle. But he also knew that the way she'd said whatever this is wasn't confusion. It was someone who knew exactly what it was and was figuring out whether she was allowed to have it. He wasn't going to push. He was going to keep showing up on Saturdays, keep the calls going, let Maisie do what Maisie did, which was see everything clearly and name it without apology, and let whatever it was be whatever it was at the pace it needed. That was all you could do, really. That and show up. The Christmas Saturday was the last one before the holiday, and Rosa had put tinsel along the bar and a small lit tree on the counter, and the star marshmallows were officially in rotation because Maisie had confirmed it with the calendar. Maisie got 3 stars in her hot chocolate and declared it the best one so far this year. V brought Maisie a gift. She'd wrapped it in blue paper with a whale on the tag, and she handed it over with the slight self-conscious quality of someone who had thought very carefully about something and wasn't sure if the thinking was visible. It was a book, a beautiful one, hardcover, with photographs of ocean life, the kind that was heavy and real and meant to last. Inside the cover, she'd written, "For Maisie, who knows that the heart of a blue whale is the size of a small car. V." Maisie read the inscription 3 times. Then she looked up at V with an expression that Logan recognized, the one his daughter used when she'd decided something was real and permanent. "This is mine forever," Maisie said. "Yes," V said. "That's the idea." Maisie opened to the first page and was immediately lost. Logan looked at V across the table. She was watching Maisie with an expression that was completely unguarded. No management, no careful presentation, just something open and clear and a little raw, like someone standing in a cold room who has just found the warmth. "Thank you," Logan said. Quietly. She looked at him. "She's easy to buy for. She knows exactly what she loves. She's lucky that way." "She is." A pause. "So are some people around her." She said it simply, without flourish, and then looked back at her coffee, and Logan let it sit there in the warm cafe air between them, not ignoring it, not pressing it, just letting it be what it was. Outside, December was doing its best. The city had put lights on the trees along the block, and they blinked through the foggy cafe window, blue and white. And Rosa was behind the counter humming to something, and Maisie was 3 pages into the ocean book and had already audibly gasped twice, and the piano record played on. What none of them knew, what had no reason yet to intrude on any of this, was that 6 blocks north, in a high-rise conference room with a view of the same December street, a man named Marcus Hale was on a phone call with someone from a media company, describing the personal life of his company's founder in terms that were carefully designed to sound like concern and were not concern at all. He had a photograph. It had been taken 2 Saturdays ago through the window of a cafe on Clement Street. Victoria Sinclair, in a gray hoodie, sitting across from a man in a delivery company jacket, a child between them, all 3 looking at something on the table. It was a clear photograph, unmistakable. And Marcus Hale was explaining, in a measured and practiced voice, exactly what he believed the photograph could be made to mean. The photograph ran on a Tuesday morning, which was the worst possible day for it, because Tuesday was Logan's longest route, and he was already in the van by 6:45 with his phone in his jacket pocket and his mind on the manifest and a travel mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm before he'd made it through the first 3 stops. He didn't see it until 9:17 when he pulled over to check a delivery address, and his phone showed 41 notifications. That number was wrong. He got maybe 4 notifications on a normal day. Route updates, a text from Mrs. Delgado, the occasional automated reminder from his building's management system about things the management system never actually followed through on. 41 was not a number his phone had ever shown him before. He opened the screen. The first text was from a number he didn't recognize. "Is this you? Birch and Brew Cafe with Victoria Sinclair?" There was a link. He tapped it, and the page took a moment to load on his signal, and then it loaded, and he sat in the parked van on Dilworth Street and looked at the photograph of himself and V and Maisie through the cafe window. It was a good photograph, technically speaking. Clear, well-framed, taken from street level through the south-facing window at the amber light angle that Logan had always associated with Saturday mornings, and slow coffee, and his daughter's running commentary. In the photograph, Maisie was bent over something on the table. The ocean book, he realized, the one V had just given her. She'd been reading the first pages. He was looking at Maisie. V was looking at him. The expression on V's face in the photograph was the unguarded one, the open one, the one he'd noticed in the moment and filed away quietly and not pressed. The headline above the photograph read, "Sinclair's Secret? Vertex CEO's Mystery Man Revealed. Sources say relationship has been hidden for months." He read the first paragraph, then the second. By the third paragraph, which described him as a local delivery driver with no known assets and a young daughter, and referred to V as apparently entranced, he stopped reading and called her. She picked up on the second ring. "I know," she said. "How long has it been up?" "Since 6 this morning. My communications director called me at 6:04. A pause. He could hear her moving, the sound of a hard floor, heels. She was already at work. It ran in Meridian Report first. 3 others picked it up by 8. There's a video segment on a morning show. A video? It's the photograph and someone talking over it. I haven't watched it. Logan looked out through the windshield at Dilworth Street. A woman was walking a dog that had stopped to investigate something in a crack in the sidewalk. Normal Tuesday. He felt like he'd woken up in a slightly wrong version of his own life. "Does it say anything about Maisie?" he asked. A half-second pause that told him everything before she answered. "There's a line about her. They describe her as your daughter, but they don't use her name." Another pause. "Logan, I'm sorry. I should have... I knew there was a risk being seen in public, and I kept going because I didn't want to stop. And that was selfish. Don't do that right now." "What?" "Take all of it onto yourself. It doesn't help either of us." He heard her breathe. "What do you need?" "I need to know if my daughter's name is going to be in print by the end of the day. I have a legal team making calls right now. They won't name her. If anyone publishes her name, we pursue it immediately." "Okay." He pressed his thumb against the steering wheel. "Okay. What's the actual damage? What are they saying?" "The story is that I've been hiding a relationship. The implication is that it's some kind of... that I've been deceived somehow, or the reverse, depending on which version you read." She stopped. "Marcus sourced it." "You know that for sure?" "The photograph was taken 2 Saturdays ago. The angle and the distance are consistent with the building across the street from Birch and Brew. There's a parking structure there. Someone stood in that structure with a telephoto lens and waited." A beat. "My security team identified the access logs this morning. The parking structure is owned by a real estate holding company. That company has a director who is on the board of a firm that Marcus Hale has a personal investment in." "That's a long chain." "It's supposed to be. He's been careful." Her voice was steady, but there was something running underneath it, something cold and controlled. "He knew I was preparing for the board meeting. He moved first." Logan sat with that for a moment. Marcus Hale, whom he'd never met, whom he only knew from what V had told him and from the business pieces he'd read after her phone call in October, had stood in a parking structure 2 weeks ago and pointed a camera through the foggy window of a cafe on Clement Street at a 6-year-old reading a book about ocean life. "I need to finish my route," Logan said. "I'll call you tonight." "Logan, I'm not disappearing. I just need to finish my route." A pause. "Is your head on straight?" A short silence. "More or less." "Then go do what you need to do. I'll call you at 9. He hung up and sat for another 30 seconds, then picked up his scan pad and got out of the van. He made it through 7 more stops before the first person recognized him. A woman in her 40s at a building on Farnell Avenue opened her door, took her package, and then looked at his jacket logo and said, "Wait, are you the guy from the news, the one with Victoria Sinclair?" "No," Logan said, and logged the delivery and walked back to the van. The next recognition came at a pharmacy on Clement, different part of the street from Birch and Brew, but same name on the building would have been enough for anyone who'd read the article. A man in his 60s stood outside and watched him carry a package from the van and said, loud enough to be clear, "That's the delivery guy, the one going after the billionaire." Logan kept walking. By the time he returned the van at 4, 2 people had taken photographs of him on the street. He'd kept his head down and his pace even and not said a word to either of them, which he suspected would be used somewhere as evidence of either guilt or arrogance, depending on the narrative. Mrs. Delgado, when he picked up Maisie, took one look at his face and said, "I saw. You sit. I'm going to put on water." He sat at her kitchen table while she made tea he didn't particularly want and let Maisie explain to him in detail about the drawing she'd made at school, which was a volcano with people running from it, which she described as dramatic but educational. He nodded at the appropriate moments. He drank the tea. He told Mrs. Delgado he was fine, and she told him he didn't look fine, and he said he'd get there. "Is she a good person?" Mrs. Delgado asked. Direct. No wind-up. "Yeah," Logan said. "She is." "Then don't let them make it ugly." She refilled his cup. "People love to make things ugly. Don't give them the material." He thought about that on the walk home, Maisie holding his hand and narrating something about volcanoes that he was processing at about 40% capacity. The call at 9 was longer than usual. "Give me the actual picture," Logan said. "Not the managed version. What's the real situation?" He heard her settle, the sound of her sitting down somewhere. "Marcus has the 3 board members. Between them they hold approximately 19% of voting shares. With the right external pressure, public concern about my judgment, questions about my personal decisions affecting the company, they can call for a confidence vote. If they get another 8% on board, they have enough to force the issue." A pause. "The photograph is the external pressure. The story they're building is that I've become emotionally compromised, that I've been hiding a personal relationship that represents poor judgment, that a woman who hid this from her own board can't be trusted to run a $4 billion company. And the part about Maisie? There's a line in 2 of the follow-up pieces suggesting that Maisie has become, that you've been using her to get closer to me, that it's a calculated approach." Logan said nothing for a moment. "Say the word," V said. Her voice was even. "If you want to step back from this, I understand it completely. You didn't sign up for any of it." "I'm not stepping back. Logan, I'm not." He stood up from the kitchen table and went to the window. The street below was quiet, late-night Tuesday quiet, the neighbors' lights going off one by one. "They wrote something about my daughter. They used her. I'm not stepping back." A pause. "That's not... I don't want you to stay in this because you're angry. I'm staying because I want to." He turned away from the window. "The angry part is just how it looks right now." She was quiet for a moment. "The board meeting is February 14th. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. What do you need from me before then?" Another pause. Longer this time, the kind that had a decision being made in it. "Nothing. I need you to stay exactly where you are and not change anything. Every time you change anything, it looks like confirmation that we were hiding something wrong." "We weren't hiding anything wrong." "I know that. You know that." Her voice tightened slightly at the edges. "But the story isn't about what actually happened. It's about what it can be made to look like." He understood that. He understood it better than she might have expected, because the mechanism was the same one that had operated in his life in smaller ways. The landlord who implied maintenance issues were the tenant's fault. The daycare that had suggested Logan's work schedule reflected a lack of commitment. All the small architectural lies people built around the truth to make it fit a more convenient shape. "Then we do nothing," he said. "For now." She exhaled. "My legal team is preparing a statement. Short, factual, no detail. We confirm we know each other and call the story what it is, which is a coordinated leak from inside the company." "Does that name Marcus?" "Not directly. Not yet." A beat. "I want to name him in the boardroom, not in the press. I want to do it once, in front of the people it matters to, with documentation they can't dismiss." He thought about the 62-page document, about the 6 months of careful scaffolding, about a man standing in a parking structure with a telephoto lens pointed at his daughter. "Make it count," Logan said. "I intend to," she said. The following days had a quality that Logan could only describe as being in moving water, not swept away, but having to keep his footing active, the ground not entirely stable under him. The story didn't die down. It grew, the way stories did when there was enough ambiguity to argue about and enough money involved to make argument profitable. There were opinion pieces. There were comment sections. There were people who thought the relationship was romantic and calculated, and people who thought it was genuine, and people who thought both could be true simultaneously. Someone found his Northline Logistics Company profile and published his route territory. He got 3 calls from journalists in 2 days. He didn't answer any of them, which he'd cleared with V's communications director in a brief, efficient phone call during which the communications director had said, among other things, that Logan was handling the situation with more composure than most people in his position, and that this was noted and appreciated. Logan had thanked him and hung up and made Maisie's dinner. Maisie knew something was happening. She was 6, not oblivious. She'd picked up on the changed quality of her father's attention, the way he checked his phone more, and then put it face down on the counter. She hadn't asked directly, which was itself unusual. On Thursday evening, while he was reading to her before bed, a chapter book about a girl who could talk to birds, which they'd been working through for 2 weeks, Maisie said from under her blanket, without looking up from the illustration. Are people being mean about V? Logan held the book still. Some people are saying things, yeah, because they don't know her. Partly. Maisie considered this. They're wrong. Yeah, they are. Does she know that we know they're wrong? He looked at his daughter's face, partially obscured by the edge of her blanket, completely certain. I'll make sure she knows, he said. The following Saturday, they went to Birch and Brew. He'd thought about it and decided that not going was the wrong move, that it would look like retreat, but more than that, it would feel like retreat. And he didn't want to teach Maisie that the way to handle people being wrong about something was to make yourself smaller. 2 people outside the cafe with phones raised when they arrived. Logan kept his hand on Maisie's shoulder and walked straight in, eyes forward. Rosa, behind the counter, met his eyes and gave him a small nod that communicated several things at once and required no words. V was there. She was in a different jacket today. Not the gray hoodie, something slightly more put together, like she'd thought about it. Her face when she looked up had the careful expression of someone who'd been running a conversation in their head and wasn't sure which version of it they were about to have. Maisie pulled free of Logan's hand, crossed to V's table, and without prelude climbed up onto the chair next to her. We came, Maisie said. V looked at her for a moment. I see that. Because we're not going to let people who don't know you say things. Maisie said this with complete matter-of-factness, the tone of someone reading back a settled decision. Dad said we'd make sure you knew. Something crossed V's face. Fast, contained, but not contained enough. She pressed her lips together briefly. Thank you, she said. Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. You're welcome. Maisie reached across the table and patted V's hand once, with the particular gentle authoritativeness of a child who has decided someone needs comforting. Then she looked toward the counter. Were the stars back? Rosa said yes, V managed. Maisie slid off the chair and went to investigate. Logan sat down across from V. She was looking at the table. She blinked once, twice, working something back into order. She's 6, Logan said. She doesn't think it needs to be complicated. V looked up. It doesn't, she said. It really doesn't. I think I keep making it complicated because that's what I know how to do. I know. I'm not sure you do. She glanced toward Maisie at the counter. Logan, I've been in rooms my entire adult life where everything is a negotiation. Every offer, every relationship, even the things that are supposed to be uncomplicated have subclauses. And I got good at reading them. I got good at understanding what people actually want. She paused. And then you come in and you're just there. You're just genuinely there. And I keep waiting for the subclause. There isn't one. I know that. She looked at him directly. I know that now. I think I knew it earlier and didn't let myself. She stopped. I'm sorry for the way this landed on you. You already said that. I know. I mean it more now that I've seen the actual fallout. V. He waited until she was looking at him. I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in what happens next. She looked at him for a moment with that measuring quality. Not suspicious, just careful. Then something in it shifted. The board meeting is February 14th, she said again. Marcus thinks he has what he needs. He doesn't know what I've been building. What have you been building? 37 months of financial records. 4 independent audits that Marcus commissioned himself and that I've had independently reviewed. 17 emails in which Marcus communicates directly with the 3 dissenting board members about strategy for the confidence vote. Emails sent from his personal account, which he apparently believed was unconnected to company servers. It isn't. Logan absorbed this. You've had all of that. I've had most of it since November. I was waiting. A pause. He moved first with the photograph because he knew I was ready. He thought the publicity would compromise me enough to shift 2 more board members before February. She turned her coffee cup. It might have worked if the public framing had been different, but the version of the story he sold, the version that implies you manipulated your daughter into getting close to me, that one backfired. How? Because it's so obviously wrong that anyone who knows anything about how people actually behave can see it. Her voice had a careful steadiness that he recognized as controlled anger. Parents don't use 6-year-olds as tactical assets. Anyone who's been near a child for more than 10 minutes knows that. The story overcorrected, and now there are 3 counter-narratives in the press saying Marcus's source framed a child, which is not the coverage he wanted. She paused. My communications director says the sympathy index has shifted in the last 48 hours. Sympathy index. I know how it sounds. It's what they measure. A beat. The point is he made a mistake. He's angry and he's been careful for 6 months, and he finally made a mistake. Logan thought about what Mrs. Delgado had said. Don't give them the material. He thought about Maisie patting V's hand. He thought about 37 months of financial records and 17 emails, and a woman who had spent the last 6 weeks appearing to be simply a person in a gray hoodie reading a book, while also quietly constructing the precise architecture of someone's professional destruction. You're extraordinary, he said. She blinked. Apparently that was not what she'd been expecting. I'm prepared, she said carefully. Same thing sometimes. Rosa arrived with Maisie, who had the confirmed star hot chocolate and the expression of someone whose faith in the calendar system had been validated. She climbed into the window booth and arranged her cocoa with the precision of someone setting up a still life. Stars, she confirmed. Stars, Logan agreed. Outside, the 2 people with their phones were still there. One of them raised a camera toward the window. Logan looked at him steadily until the man lowered it, then turned back to the booth. Maisie was already deep in the ocean book. V had opened her own coffee cup and was warming her hands on it, and the jazz was playing, and Rosa's new lights along the bar reflected in the window glass. The Saturday held. What neither Logan nor V discussed that morning, because it wasn't the right moment, because Maisie was there, and because some conversations need to wait until the immediate thing has settled, was what he'd felt watching her face when Maisie climbed up and took her hand. He'd seen it clearly, not just gratitude, not just being moved. Something older than that. Something that had been waiting in her for a long time and had finally found a surface to rest on. He sat with it and didn't push. The week before the board meeting, things accelerated. A second piece ran, this one in a business publication, drier in tone, the kind of article that was written for people who read annual reports for pleasure. It cited anonymous sources close to the Vertex board and suggested that Victoria Sinclair's recent personal distractions represented a pattern of instability that the company could not sustain at the current growth stage. It stopped just short of calling for the confidence vote directly, which meant whoever had sourced it knew how to keep technical distance. Logan read it sitting in the van during a lunch break. He read it twice and then put his phone away and ate his sandwich and thought about the phrase personal distractions. The phrase was doing a lot of work in that article. It was the kind of language that was technically neutral and functionally corrosive, designed to make you do the math yourself, draw your own conclusions, arrive at the desired judgment without being directly led there. He called V's cell. She picked up in 2 rings. I read the piece, he said. I know, I'm sorry you're in the middle of this. Stop apologizing, I called to ask if you're okay. And a pause. The kinds that meant she was recalibrating from whatever mode she'd been in before the call. I'm managing. That's not the same thing. No, she admitted. It isn't. A breath. Logan, I want to be honest with you. The next 2 weeks are going to be... It's going to get worse before the board meeting. Marcus has more material. I don't know exactly what it is, but my legal team has flagged it. Something else is coming. What do you think it is? I think he's going to try to make the story about Maisie specifically. I think he found something he believes he can use. Her voice was careful and tight, walking a line. I want you to be prepared for that. He sat with this. The van was warm and the street outside was doing its ordinary Wednesday afternoon thing. Delivery trucks double parked, someone's car alarm going off half a block up, a woman running for a bus. What could he use? Logan asked. I don't know yet. It might be nothing. It might be the custody arrangement. The fact that you're a single parent, that there's no co-parenting structure. It might be your income, your housing, something he can frame as instability. The word came out with a particular edge, like she was tasting something she found disgusting. He'll try to make you look like someone who has something to gain from this, and he'll use Maisie as evidence of vulnerability, of something to exploit. He's going to say I'm after your money. He's going to imply it carefully enough to have deniability. Logan looked out through the windshield at nothing specific. Can I ask you something? Yes? Is any part of you, even a small part, not sure? The silence that followed was long enough that he felt it. Not a hesitation silence, a thinking silence. There was a difference. No, she said. No part of me is not sure. Logan, the night you came into my apartment and made soup on my stove without asking permission and set it in front of me without making a thing of it. I knew then. I didn't let myself think about it too hard because the situation was what it was. But I knew. A pause. I know what people look like when they want something from me. I've been dealing with that since I was 23. You have never once looked like that. Okay, he said. Okay? I needed to hear it directly. I believe you. Another pause. You could have just told me you believed me. I needed to ask first. Fair, she said, and the tension in her voice had dropped about 2 degrees. 6 days, he said. 6 days. What happens after the board meeting if you win? When I win, she said. Quietly, but absolutely. He almost smiled. When? Marcus is out. The 3 board members face a choice between resigning and facing the audit findings publicly, or resigning quietly. My general counsel believes they'll choose quietly. A beat. After that, I'm going to make some changes about how I'm running things, about what I'm prioritizing. Like what? She was quiet for a moment. I want to stop living at the pace I've been living at. I've been running Vertex like I'm trying to outrun something. I'm not sure anymore what I was trying to outrun. A pause. Or I am sure, and I've been avoiding saying it out loud. He waited. I think I was afraid that if I stopped moving, there'd be nothing there, she said. The words were careful and very quiet. Just the apartment and the work and the meetings. Nothing that was actually mine. Nothing that couldn't be taken by the next Marcus Hale with a 62-page document. And now? A long, careful breath. Now I have a reason to stop moving, she said. Logan held the phone and felt the weight of that sentence. 6 weeks ago, he'd delivered a package to a penthouse on Meridian Avenue and found a woman on the floor who'd told him firmly that she did not need an ambulance and had then accepted soup from a delivery driver she'd never met. He thought about how much had been built in the space of a few ordinary Saturdays, in the amber light of a cafe with a napkin folded under the short table leg, around a 6-year-old's drawings of whales. 6 days, he said again. I'll be ready, she said. He believed her. What he hadn't expected, what neither of them had adequately prepared for, was what Marcus Hale released on the Thursday before the board meeting. Not a press piece, not a photograph. A statement posted directly to a financial news feed attributed to a concerned party with the knowledge of internal Vertex affairs. and forwarded within 3 hours to every business journalist in the country. It was 4 paragraphs long. The first described the ongoing personal entanglement of the Vertex CEO with a private individual. The second raised questions about the welfare and stability of the child involved, who is reportedly being used to form emotional attachments with high net worth targets. The third suggested that Vertex's board had a duty to its shareholders to examine the judgment of an executive who has introduced a potentially vulnerable child into a high-stakes personal strategy. The fourth paragraph was a single sentence. The question the board must answer is whether a leader who allows herself to be manipulated through her affection for a child is fit to manage the responsibilities of a $4 billion enterprise. Logan read it at 11 at night after Maisie was in bed. He read it twice. Then he put his phone face down on the kitchen table and sat very still for about 60 seconds. Then he picked the phone back up and called V. She picked up immediately, which told him she'd been waiting. "I know," she said, before he could say anything. "Logan, I'm so sorry. That's what he wrote about Maisie is..." "I'm going to make a statement," Logan said. Silence. "I've been quiet because you asked me to be," he said, "and I understood why. But that thing calls my daughter a tool. It says she's being used, by me, against you." His voice was steady. He was working to keep it steady. "I'm not staying quiet about that. Logan, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I want you to know before I do it." A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The communications management had dropped out of it entirely. "What are you going to say?" she asked. "The truth," he said. "Just the truth. Nothing about the board meeting, nothing about Marcus, nothing about Vertex. Just the truth about who my daughter is and what actually happened." Another pause. "My communications director is going to want to vet..." "No. Logan, no," he said again. "This isn't a company statement. This is me. If your director vets it, it becomes a company statement. That's not what it needs to be." The silence on her end lasted long enough that he thought she might push back harder. Then, "Okay," she said. Quiet. "Okay. Get some sleep," he said. "You have a board meeting in 2 days." "I will." A pause. "Logan, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Wait and see what I actually say." He hung up and sat at the kitchen table with his phone and the quiet kitchen and the confident fish drawn on the tile, and thought about what the truth actually looked like when you took it out and laid it flat where everyone could see it. He opened the notes app on his phone and started writing. He wrote it in 40 minutes, which was about 35 minutes longer than he'd expected it to take, and 5 minutes shorter than he'd feared. It wasn't long. He didn't want it to be long. Long statements invited dissection, invited people to find the sentence that could be pulled out of context and made into something else. He wrote it the way he talked, without trying to sound like anything other than what he was. And he read it back 3 times and changed 2 words, and then posted it from his personal account at 12:47 in the morning. It said, "My name is Logan Pierce. I'm a delivery driver. I'm also a father, which is the more important job. My daughter Maisie is 6 years old. She likes whales, volcanoes, drawing, and asking questions about things until she understands them completely. She's not a strategy. She's not a tool. She's a child who sees people clearly and treats them accordingly, which is something most adults I know have lost the ability to do. I met Victoria Sinclair by accident. We became friends because my daughter decided she was worth talking to, and my daughter is a better judge of character than most people I've encountered. What happened between us happened slowly and honestly and without any agenda on either side. Someone decided to take a photograph of a little girl reading a book in a cafe and describe it as manipulation. I'm not going to use careful language about that. It's a lie. It's a lie told by someone who needed a weapon and chose a child because children can't defend themselves. I was offered money to go away quietly. I'm told the amount was significant. I didn't take it because there is no amount of money that makes what was written about my daughter acceptable, and because Victoria Sinclair's character doesn't need my silence to protect it. It needs the truth. That's all I have. He put the phone down and went to bed. He didn't sleep particularly well, but he'd expected that. By 6 in the morning, the post had been shared 40,000 times. By the time he got Maisie up and fed and delivered to Mrs. Delgado's and himself into the van for his route, it was at 230,000. His phone had stopped being a useful object. It was generating notifications faster than they could resolve, a constant low vibration in his jacket pocket that he eventually silenced and stopped checking. He knew the number would be what it would be. He'd said what was true. Whatever happened to it after that was out of his hands. He made it through his first 8 stops on pure routine, the mechanical comfort of doing something he knew exactly how to do, before Rosa called him. "Logan!" Her voice had the quality of someone who has been watching something happen and needs to tell you about it. "I have 3 journalists outside my cafe right now." He exhaled. "I'm sorry, Rosa." "Don't apologize. I just want you to know. They're not causing trouble, but they're here." A pause. "Also, your post." "Yeah. It's everywhere. I had someone call me this morning who said they read it and cried." Another pause. "I cried a little, just so you know." He didn't know what to do with that. "I just said what was true." "That's what got me," she said. "That's exactly what got me." She told him the journalists left around 11 without getting what they came for, because no one inside Birch and Brew told them anything useful. He thanked her. She told him to bring Maisie by on Saturday, stars or no stars, and hung up. V called at noon. "The statement," she said, and then didn't say anything else for a moment. "Good or bad?" he asked. "The board members have been calling my general counsel since 7 this morning." Her voice was carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that required active maintenance. 2 of the 3, not Marcus's direct allies, the third one, the one who was peripheral to the original plan. "He wants a conversation before tomorrow." "That's good?" "Yes, that's good." A pause. "Logan, there are people defending you on every platform I have visibility on. It's not a PR movement. It's just people saying this is a man who told the truth, that's all." Another pause, shorter. "I'm having a hard time with it." "With what?" "With the fact that you did that and I didn't ask you to, and you didn't make it about the board meeting or Vertex or any of it. You made it about Maisie." "It was about Maisie." "I know." Her voice went quieter. "Nobody has ever, Logan, nobody has stood up in public for me before. Not like that. Not without it being strategic." He was in the van on the shoulder of a side street with his engine idling, and he thought about that, about what it meant to have gotten to 30 years old in the world she'd been navigating and not had anyone say, publicly, without calculation. "This person's character doesn't need protecting, but I'm going to say the truth anyway." "You should have people who do that," he said. "I'm beginning to think so too." A pause. "The money they offered you. You knew about it?" V. "How much was it?" He was quiet for a second. 150,000. Silence on her end. "Logan, it was a phone call 2 weeks ago. Someone I didn't know said they represented a concerned third party, told me this didn't have to be complicated and that there was a settlement offer available. I hung up." He paused. "I should have told you." "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't want you to think I'd considered it." Another silence. "Did you?" For about 4 seconds. Long enough to think about what $150,000 would mean for me and Maisie, and then long enough to understand what it would mean for everything else. A beat. "It wasn't close," she breathed. "Thank you for saying that." "The 4 seconds or the hanging up?" "Both," she said. "The honesty of both." The board meeting was the following day, February 14th, which Logan had noted with a particular awareness that he hadn't mentioned to V because it wasn't the kind of observation that needed to be made out loud. He dropped Maisie at school that morning, a Thursday, which was usually Mrs. Delgado's day, but school was open and Maisie had a project about the water cycle that she had strong feelings about presenting, so the routine held. He watched her walk through the school entrance with her backpack sitting slightly lopsided because she'd packed it herself and overfilled the main compartment, and he thought about how much of his life for the past 4 years had been organized around the simple repeated fact of getting her safely from one place to the next. Then he drove his route. There was nothing else to do. The board meeting was V's territory, her preparation, her evidence, her years of work at the company she'd built. He wasn't in the room. He couldn't be in the room. His job today was to make his deliveries and pick up his daughter and make her dinner and answer his phone when it rang. He made 19 deliveries. He ate lunch in the van. He thought about a lot of things and landed on none of them in particular, which was probably the best he could manage. At 2:15, V texted, "Going in. 4 hours, maybe more." He texted back, "I'll be here." He was home with Maisie by 5, which was early enough that she got to watch an episode of her current show while he made dinner. A comfortable domestic routine that felt like the most stable thing in his life right now, which it probably was. Maisie talked about the water cycle presentation with a detailed breakdown of what the teacher had said and what the other kids had done wrong in their projects, which was an assessment Logan received with a straight face. "Did you get it right?" he asked. "Obviously," Maisie said. "Obviously." At 6:40, his phone buzzed. It's done. He put down his fork. Maisie was across the table eating pasta shaped like dinosaurs, completely absorbed in aligning them by species, and didn't notice. He typed, "How?" The reply came in pieces, the kind of fragmented texting that meant she was still in the building, possibly in a corridor, adrenaline still running. "Marcus is out. 3 board members tendering resignation pending audit findings. Full confidence vote, 11 in favor, 2 abstentions, 0 against." A pause, then they'd already started flipping before I presented. "Your statement shifted 2 of them." He read that last sentence twice. "Are you okay?" he typed. The response took a minute. Then, "I'm standing in a stairwell because I needed 30 seconds that weren't a conference room. So, getting there." He almost smiled. "Take your 30 seconds. Logan." A pause. "I want to tell you something, and I'm going to tell it badly because I'm still running on adrenaline and I've been in that room for 4.5 hours. But I want to say it before I overthink it." He waited. "I've spent 12 years building something because I thought that was the thing that would make me feel like I had a place in the world, like I belonged somewhere. And I built it, and I protected it, and today I took back control of it. And the first person I wanted to tell wasn't my board, and wasn't my lawyer, and wasn't anyone in that building. It was you." Another pause. "I don't know how to do what comes next, but I want to figure it out. With you. If that's something you want." Logan sat at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand and Maisie arranging dinosaur pasta across the table and the confident fish on the tile visible from where he was sitting, and he read the message twice. Then he typed, "It's something I want." A longer pause this time. Then, "Okay." Then, "Okay, good." Then, after another moment, "Your daughter texted me again from your phone last week. Did you know that?" He hadn't known. He looked up at Maisie. "Did you text V from my phone again?" Maisie looked up from the pasta arrangement. "I told her about the water cycle project." "Why?" "Because she likes learning things." She moved a brachiosaurus into position. "Is that bad?" He looked back at his phone. "She says no," he typed. "Obviously no," V replied. Then, "I'm going back inside. Press statement in an hour. I have to put my game face back on." "You never took it off," he typed. "You'd be surprised." A pause. "The stairwell counts." He put his phone down and looked at his daughter's serious, focused face as she corrected the arrangement of her dinner and thought about stairwells and 30 seconds and the particular courage of saying something true before you've had time to edit it into something safer. "Is V okay?" Maisie asked, without looking up. "Yeah," Logan said. "She's going to be okay." Maisie nodded, satisfied, and moved a triceratops 2 centimeters to the left. The press statement ran at 8:15 that evening. Logan watched it on his laptop at the kitchen table after Maisie was in bed. It was recorded, not live. V at a podium in a conference room, the Vertex logo on the wall behind her, her hair pulled back in the precise professional arrangement he'd seen in the Forbes photographs. The blazer, the posture, the controlled authority that was a completely different surface than the gray hoodie and the cracked spine paperback. But her eyes, when she looked directly at the camera, were not managed. They had the quality he'd been seeing more of lately. The looser quality of someone who had stopped spending as much energy on containing herself. She confirmed Marcus Hale's removal and the resignations of the 3 associated board members. She described the nature of the documented misconduct, financial misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, coordinated effort to undermine the company's leadership, in language that was precise and unequivocal and gave no one anything to argue about technically. She said the company was healthy, its fundamentals strong, its leadership committed to its founding principles. Then she paused. A beat that was too long for a prepared statement, short enough that you might miss it. "I want to say something that isn't in my prepared remarks," she said. Logan leaned forward slightly. "A man I know wrote something this week that people have been sharing. He wrote it about his daughter and about the truth, and he didn't ask anyone for permission, and he didn't run it past a communications department." A pause. "He said that his daughter sees people clearly and treats them accordingly. I've had the chance to see that for myself, and he's right. She does." Another beat. "I don't think I've been treated that simply and that honestly by anyone in a very long time. I'm grateful for it, that's all." She looked back at her notes and moved on to shareholder information and the restructured executive timeline, and the statement continued in its professional register. But Logan sat back in his chair and thought about the fact that she'd said that on camera in front of every journalist and investor and board member and analyst who watched the Vertex feed, without a filter and without a script. He texted her at 9:30. That last part. She replied, "I know. Don't tell my communications director I went off script. He knows. I know he knows. He's been very quiet, which means he's either horrified or he thinks it worked. Did it work?" A pause. Then, "I don't really care if it worked. I meant it." He put his phone down and sat in the kitchen for a while in the good kind of quiet, the kind that has weight to it, that feels like something real taking up space. The days after the board meeting had a different quality than the days before. Something decompressed, like a house after a long storm has passed. The air changed. The press attention didn't disappear immediately, but it shifted register, from the aggressive speculative coverage of the previous weeks to something more analytical. People parsing the board meeting's outcome and its implications for Vertex, the story moving from Sinclair's secret to Sinclair's power play, which was still coverage but was coverage about the company rather than about a photograph through a cafe window. Logan's post stayed up and kept accumulating shares in the slow, steady way that things do when they've touched something real. Not a viral moment that burns hot and disappears, but the quieter spread of something people kept returning to. He got messages from other single parents. He got messages from people who'd been in situations where someone told a lie about them and they hadn't known how to answer it. He got messages from people he'd never met who said things like, "I don't know you, but I believe you. And this is what honesty sounds like." And a handful of things that were harder to read because they were too specific and too raw. People who recognized something in the situation that connected to things in their own lives that they hadn't expected to put words to. He didn't respond to most of them. He didn't know how, but he read them. The money offer came back once more, 5 days after the board meeting. A different caller, same pitch, higher number. He hung up before they finished the sentence, and the calls stopped after that. What came instead, in the following weeks, was something that didn't have a name yet, but that he was beginning to stop trying to name and just let exist in its own shape. V came to Cassidy Street for the first time on a Sunday in late February, which was neither planned nor particularly ceremonious. She'd called in the morning saying she had the day free, which was apparently unusual enough that she wasn't sure what to do with it. And he'd said he and Maisie were going to the farmer's market on Ashford Street, and she could come if she wanted. She'd shown up in the gray hoodie and jeans and had stood on the sidewalk outside his building, looking up at the fourth-floor windows with an expression that was completely unreadable. And he'd come down and they'd walk to the market with Maisie between them, which was where Maisie had immediately positioned herself. The farmer's market in late February was a stripped-down version of what it would become in a few months. Fewer vendors, less produce, the cold keeping the crowds light. Maisie led them to a stand that sold honey in different varieties and spent 10 minutes asking the vendor questions about bees that the vendor answered with increasing enthusiasm. V stood beside Logan and watched this and didn't say much, which was fine. The market was the kind of place that didn't require narration. They bought honey and a bag of late-season apples and a jar of something the vendor described as fire cider that Maisie had selected entirely on the basis of its name and that Logan was fairly confident was going to be unpleasant. On the walk back, Maisie got tired. Suddenly and completely, the way children do, as if someone had pulled a plug, and Logan picked her up and she leaned her head against his shoulder and was half asleep within a block. V walked beside him. The street was quiet. There was a dog being walked on the other side, and somewhere down the block a radio playing through an open window, and that was all. She went out fast, V said. She does that, full speed until she stops. A pause. You carry her like it's nothing. She's 42 pounds. I know, but... She stopped. I was thinking about what it must be like, to be the person someone just goes limp and trusts completely. He looked at Maisie's face against his shoulder. Her eyelashes were resting on her cheek and her mouth was slightly open, and she was completely, utterly at rest. He carried her this way a few times a week still, though she was getting to the age where she'd protest it if she were awake. It's a lot, he said. In the good way. V nodded. She was looking at Maisie's sleeping face with that expression, the one that had been showing up more since the board meeting, the open one, the one that didn't try to go anywhere. Can I ask you something? She said. Yeah. When her mother left, did you think you could do it? He considered the question honestly. No, he said. Not really. I thought I was going to ruin her somehow. Get something fundamentally wrong. A beat. I still worry about that. But you haven't. I don't know. She's 6. She seems okay. Ask me when she's 16. V made a small sound that was almost a laugh. She's going to be formidable at 16. Terrifying, he agreed. Completely terrifying. They walked the rest of the block in quiet, and when they got to his building, she stopped at the entrance while he shifted Maisie's weight to get his keys out, and she held the door open, which was the kind of ordinary small assistance that didn't need to be commented on. He got Maisie settled on the couch with a blanket and came back to the kitchen, where V was standing at the counter looking at the tile crack with the new confident fish. The tile, she said. She approved the design. V crouched slightly to look at it closer. The fish had a definitive forward lean that Maisie had achieved through eyebrow placement, which was a choice Logan had found unexpectedly effective. She gave it eyebrows, V said. Confident fish need eyebrows, apparently. V straightened and looked at the kitchen. The small, ordinary kitchen with its slightly uneven tile, and the corner where the shelf didn't sit quite flush, and the drawing held to the refrigerator with a magnet from a place neither of them had visited. She looked at it the way she'd looked at his building from the sidewalk, not with disappointment or analysis, but with a kind of careful, deliberate attention, like she was seeing something she wanted to see accurately. I like it here, she said, quietly. It's not much. That's not what I mean. She looked at him. I mean, I like it. I like the way it feels. He leaned against the counter. What does it feel like? She thought about it for a moment. Like people actually live here, she said. Like things are worn in rather than set up. A pause. My apartment looks like a hotel that specializes in the appearance of having a resident. It could look different. I know. She crossed her arms loosely, not closed off, just thinking. I've been making lists. Of what? Of things I want to change. Real ones, not the kind of lists I make for work where everything has a deliverable and a timeline. Just, she stopped. Things I want my life to look like. Things I've been putting off because I was always too busy, or it wasn't the right moment, or I told myself I'd get to it after the next thing. A beat. There is always a next thing. What's on the list? She looked at the fish. A kitchen that has a fish on the tile, she said. And then, because that had come out more directly than she'd intended, she added, and other things. He watched her and didn't say anything, and the apartment was very quiet because Maisie was sleeping on the couch with the blanket pulled up to her chin, and outside it was a late February Sunday with the particular stillness of a cold city on a day when most people have decided to stay inside. V, he said. She looked at him. I don't want to push anything, he said. I'm not going to push. But I want you to know that whatever's on that list, the real list, I'm interested in it. Not as a project or a plan, just I want to know what you want. Not the managed version. She held his gaze for a long moment. The careful expression was there, but underneath it something had settled. That tension that had been in her the first time he'd seen her, that night on the penthouse floor, That bone-deep exhaustion of someone holding everything together by themselves had changed. Not gone entirely, but different, like it had company now. "You," she said, simply. "That's what I want. That's the main thing on the list." He nodded once. He didn't make a thing of it. He crossed the kitchen, and she stayed where she was, and he stood close enough that when he put his hand against the side of her face, she turned into it without hesitating, which said more than any sentence either of them could have constructed. They stood in the kitchen for a moment in the quiet. From the couch, Maisie made the small sound that meant she was drifting between sleep and awake, and Logan felt V breathe. One long, real breath, the kind that comes when you've been holding something and you finally let it go. He thought about how the past several months had looked from the outside versus how they'd felt from the inside. From the outside, a delivery driver and a billionaire, a photograph through a cafe window, a board meeting, a post that went viral, a corporate scandal resolved, clean narrative, clear arc, the kind of thing people could summarize in a sentence. From the inside, 42 pounds of sleeping child and a confident fish, and the way someone looks when they're reading a cracked spine paperback in a window booth, and the coffee isn't sugar, and the tile is cracked, and nothing is particularly smooth or polished or certain, and none of that matters at all. "The firesider's going to be terrible," V said against his shoulder. "It's going to be terrible," he agreed. "We should try it anyway." "Obviously," he said. And the February Sunday held them both in the kitchen with the fish on the tile and the child on the couch. And the afternoon light came through the window at the wrong angle for Amber, but the right angle for something else. Something ordinary and specific and real, the kind of light that belonged to a particular place and stayed. The firesider was, in fact, terrible. Maisie woke up from her couch nap 40 minutes later, found the jar on the kitchen counter, and demanded to try it on the basis of its name. Logan let her because he'd already tried it himself and felt that the experience was educational. She took one small sip, made a face that involved every muscle in her head, put the jar back on the counter with great deliberateness, and said, "That's not food." "It's a health product," V said from her place at the kitchen table where she was nursing a glass of water with the expression of someone who had also made a poor decision. "It's not healthy either," Maisie said with complete certainty, and climbed up onto the chair beside V and asked if they could make actual food now. They made pasta. Not the dinosaur kind. Logan had run out. But the regular kind with a sauce he made from a can and some garlic and the good olive oil that was the one food indulgence he allowed himself without guilt. V sat at the table and talked to Maisie about the farmer's market honey while he cooked, and Maisie had opinions about every variety they'd bought and a proposal for a scientific experiment involving all 4 jars and a series of crackers, which V engaged with seriously, and Logan filed away as something that was going to make a mess on a future Sunday. They ate at the small kitchen table, the 3 of them, tight in the space, elbows occasionally intersecting, Maisie conducting the conversation with her usual editorial authority. It was ordinary in a way that felt extraordinary only from a particular angle, and Logan was aware of both simultaneously, the complete ordinariness of pasta on a Sunday evening and the fact that 5 months ago none of this existed. After dinner, after Maisie had been bathed and put to bed with the ocean book and 2 chapters of the Bird Girl story and a final authoritative recap of the honey experiment proposal, Logan came back to the kitchen and found V standing at the window looking out at Cassidy Street in the dark. She turned when he came in. "I should go," she said. "It's late." "You don't have to." She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. "But I should. Not because—" She stopped. "I'm not retreating. I just want to do this right, whatever this is. I don't want to rush it, because I'm impatient." He leaned against the doorframe. "That's a very self-aware thing to say. I've been working on self-awareness. It's a recent project." She picked up her jacket from the chair. "Logan, today was—" "Good," he said. She paused with the jacket half on. "Yeah," she said. "It was good." "Same time next Sunday," he said. "Bring your list." She looked at him, the careful expression, the open one underneath it. "The actual list?" "The actual list." She finished putting her jacket on. At the door she turned back once, briefly, and the look she gave him wasn't complicated or managed or anything that required translation. It was just, "I see you. and I'm coming back." Then she let herself out, and he heard her footsteps in the hallway and the elevator, and then the building was quiet. He stood in the kitchen for a while with the clean plates in the drying rack and the honey jars lined up on the counter and the fish on the tile, and felt the specific grounded happiness of someone who has stopped waiting for something to go wrong. Spring came to the city the way it always did. Not all at once, but in increments. A warm week followed by a cold snap, followed by 3 days of rain that smelled different from winter rain, cleaner and more alive. The trees on Cassidy Street put out leaves that started as that tentative yellow-green and darkened over a few weeks into real green, actual green, the kind that made the street feel inhabited rather than just occupied. The weeks after February had their own shape. V brought her list the following Sunday, handwritten, on actual paper, which surprised him slightly. She was a person surrounded by screens and systems, and she'd written the list by hand in a small notebook, and she read parts of it to him at the kitchen table while Maisie drew in the other room. And some of it was practical, and some of it was personal, and some of it was things she said she'd never told anyone else because she'd never had anyone to tell them to. She wanted to learn to cook something real, not the functional eating she'd been doing for 12 years, the ordered meals and the protein bars and the coffee that was always slightly cold by the time she got to it, but actual cooking, the kind where you make something and it comes out different every time, and sometimes it's bad, and that's part of it. She wanted to read slower. She'd been reading fast her whole life, absorbing and moving on, and she wanted to stop doing that. She wanted to read the way Maisie listened, fully, without already preparing the next thing. She wanted her apartment to stop looking like a hotel. She didn't know exactly what she wanted it to look like instead, but she wanted there to be something on the walls that she'd chosen because she liked it, not because it photographed well for the profile pieces. She wanted to stop answering emails after 8 in the evening. She'd been answering emails after 8 in the evening for 11 years, and she wasn't sure what happened if she stopped, but she wanted to find out. Logan listened to all of it. He didn't say that it was a good list or that she deserved it or any of the things that would have sounded supportive and been slightly empty. He just listened, and when she was done, he said, "The cooking thing is going to take longer than you expect." "I know. And you're going to be bad at it for a while." I assumed. "Okay," he said. "We can start next Sunday." She looked at him. "You're going to teach me to cook." "I'm a decent cook, nothing impressive, but decent." "You made good pasta last week." "It's the olive oil. Good olive oil covers a lot of ground." She wrote olive oil in the notebook with what appeared to be complete sincerity, and he decided he was absolutely keeping this woman. The cooking lessons were imperfect in the specific way that good things often are. The first attempt was eggs. Scrambled, which V had suggested on the basis of being simple, and Logan had agreed to on the basis of a lie, because scrambled eggs are actually one of the more technically demanding things you can do with a pan and a low flame. V scrambled them too fast on heat that was too high, and produced something that was edible but aggressive. And she stood over the pan with the spatula and said, with genuine frustration, "It went wrong so fast." "That's eggs," Logan said. "How do you know when the heat's right?" "You can hear it. There's a sound. When it's right, it's almost quiet. When it's too hot, there's this fast crackling." She frowned at the pan. "I should have been told this. Most people learn it wrong several times first." "I don't like learning things wrong." "I know," he said. "That's something you're also working on." She looked at him. He kept a straight face. After a moment, she looked back at the pan and said quietly, "The eggs are still fine." "The eggs are fine." She served them to Maisie, who ate them without complaint because Maisie applied the same standard to food that she applied to most things. Is it edible, and was it made with good intent? If yes, acceptable. She was, Logan had always thought, a better person than most adults he knew. V figured out the eggs by the third try. She figured out the pasta on the second. She had what Logan began to recognize as a genuine learner's stubbornness. Not ego about being right, but refusal to accept not understanding something. She wanted to know why the technique worked, not just that it did. She asked questions the way Maisie asked questions, without embarrassment about not knowing the answer. He liked this about her more than almost anything else, the way she was willing to be new at something. They had the first real argument in March. Not dramatic, not of the kind with raised voices or anything thrown, nothing that dramatic, but real, which meant it had content. He'd been distracted for a week, a run of bad shifts, the van breaking down twice in 4 days, a late payment on the electric bill that he'd missed because he'd been up late too many nights running. And when she'd come over on Sunday, he'd been short with her in a way that he could feel himself doing and couldn't entirely stop. She'd been patient through dinner, and after dinner, she'd asked him directly what was going on. And he'd said it was nothing, and she'd said she'd like it if he didn't do that, and he'd said he wasn't going to bring his problems to her, and she'd gone quiet in a way that was worse than if she'd argued back. Then she said, "You told me that I didn't know how to ask for help. You told me I was good at making myself hard to worry about." He didn't say anything. "That was true," she said. "I've been working on it. I've been trying to let you see when things are hard. And now you're sitting across from me with the same face you told me about, and you won't say one true thing." A pause. "That's not what I want this to be." He sat with that. She was right. He knew she was right while she was saying it. "The van broke down twice," he said. "I know. You mentioned it briefly. It costs money every time it breaks down. I pay the repair out of pocket before the company reimburses, and the reimbursement takes 2 weeks, which means I was $340 short this month, and I paid the electric late, and they're going to charge a fee, and it's just, it piles up." He stopped. "It's not a crisis. It's just the pile." She looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me that when it was happening?" "Because you've got $4 billion, and I've got a late electric bill, and I didn't want it to sound like what? Like I was asking." The silence that followed was several seconds long and had real texture to it. "Logan," she said. Her voice was careful and direct. "I know the difference between someone asking and someone telling me what's real. I've known the difference my whole life. I've had to because so many people do the first one. You are constitutionally incapable of the first one. That's not an insult. That's just who you are." A pause. "Tell me what's real. That's all I'm asking." He looked at the table. "The pile's been heavy this week." "Okay," she said. "Thank you." They didn't fix the pile that night. She didn't offer money, and he didn't ask for it, and neither of them suggested that the gap between their financial realities was something that needed solving immediately. They just sat in the kitchen and talked through the rest of the evening, and it was the first time he'd talked to her about money without the background awareness of the distance between them, and that felt like something important had moved. Later, walking her to the elevator, she said, "The van. Can you negotiate the reimbursement timeline with the company? I've asked before. They say the system is the system. Do you want me to look at the policy language?" He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "Actually, yeah." She nodded. "Send it to me this week." She read the policy, found 2 clauses that the company's own documentation contradicted regarding emergency reimbursement timing, and drafted a letter in 40 minutes that Logan sent to his depot manager the following Tuesday. He had the money by Thursday. The depot manager didn't argue, which V said was consistent with how people responded when you gave them no reasonable ground to argue on. "You're terrifying," Logan told her after he texted her the confirmation. "Only when it's warranted," she replied. Then, "Also, I burned the eggs again this morning. Too high." "I know, I was impatient. You're always working on that." "Working on it," she confirmed. The idea for the community center didn't come from either of them directly. It came from Maisie, which was consistent with how the best ideas in Logan's life had been arriving lately. It was April, a Saturday, and they were at Birch and Brew. Still their place, still the window booth, though now V sat inside rather than at the table beside it, a shift that had happened so gradually that Logan couldn't point to the specific Saturday when it had changed. Maisie was coloring, and the conversation had drifted to Logan's mention of a family in his building whose situation had been on his mind. A single mother, 2 kids, who'd been managing the same kind of controlled scramble he'd been managing for years, and who'd mentioned that the after-school program her older kid attended had lost its funding and was closing. "She doesn't have anyone to pick up from school anymore," Logan said. "She works until 6. V frowned. "What are the options?" "There aren't a lot. The neighborhood doesn't have much. There's one place across town, but the bus takes 40 minutes. Maisie looked up from her coloring. Why doesn't someone make a place for kids whose parents work? Logan and V both looked at her. Near here, Maisie added, so kids can walk. She said it the way she said most things, like the observation was obvious and the only mystery was why no one had done it already, and then went back to her coloring. Logan looked at V. V was looking at the table with the specific expression he'd learned to recognize as her working something out. Not the quick processing of a small problem, the bigger kind, the kind that involved actual architecture. How many single-parent families are in a 4-block radius of here? She said. I don't know the exact number. I know a dozen personally. What do they need most? He thought about it. After-school childcare. A safe place with some enrichment, not just parking. Weekend programming for when parents are working Saturday shifts. Somewhere kids can go that isn't just managed babysitting. She nodded slowly. What would it take to build that? A space? Staff? Funding that doesn't dry up in a year? The last part is the hardest, she said. Usually. She was quiet for another moment. Then, I have an endowment structure I've been wanting to put to use. Something local. Something with direct impact. Something I can point to that isn't Vertex. She paused. This is the thing I keep almost doing and not finding the right shape for. You'd fund it? I'd fund it sustainably. Not a donation. A structural endowment, with conditions that protect it from budget cycles. She looked at him. But I don't want to just write a check and put my name on a building. That's the wrong thing. What's the right thing? You running it, she said, or co-running it. Someone who knows what these families actually need, not someone who has a theory about it from a boardroom. A pause. You'd have to want that. I'm not going to build it and hand it to you. It's not a gift. He sat with that. It was not a small thing. It was a complete rerouting of what his working life looked like, which was not something he'd expected to be considering at 32 on a Saturday morning over coffee. I'd need to know it was real, he said. Not a project that runs for 2 years and then gets restructured. That's what the endowment structure prevents. It's legally independent of Vertex, independent of my personal finances above a threshold. It doesn't go away. And you'd let me actually run it, not manage me from a distance. I would consult, she said, because I'd know things that would be useful. But you'd run it. It's not my neighborhood. He looked out the window at Clement Street, at the corner store and the bus stop and the woman he knew by sight walking her slow old dog in the pale April sun. At the school 2 blocks north where Maisie had her water cycle project, and her friends and her confident assessments of everyone's work. At the building where Mrs. Delgado had held his daughter on evenings when he was running late, and where the couple on the second floor had brought him soup once, when he had the flu, and where the crack in his kitchen tile had been repaired and redrawn twice. Okay, he said. V looked at him steadily. Okay? Let's build it. Maisie looked up from her coloring again. Is this about the place for kids? Yeah, Logan said. She nodded in the decisive way. Good, she said, and went back to her drawing. They broke ground, which was not a literal breaking of ground, but the signing of a lease on a vacant space on Alderman Street 4 blocks from Birch and Brew in late May. The space had been a dental office, which meant it had good plumbing and adequate lighting and walls that needed repainting and floors that needed replacing and about 40% of the work already done by accident. Logan spent his evenings for 3 weeks reading through childcare licensing requirements, which were extensive and specific in the way that anything governing children always is, and which V helped him navigate through a combination of her legal network and her characteristic refusal to accept that any system was unsolvable. They painted the main room themselves on a Saturday in June. Logan, V, Maisie, and a rotation of neighbors who arrived and departed over the course of the day, having received notice through the particular grapevine that existed in neighborhoods where people actually knew each other. Mrs. Delgado came for 2 hours and painted 1 complete wall and told stories about the building from before Logan had lived there. Rosa closed Birch and Brew at 2 and showed up with sandwiches and an opinion about the color, which she delivered directly and which they mostly incorporated. Maisie painted a fish on the baseboard in one corner, low enough that only children would see it. Logan found it on Monday when he was doing a walkthrough and crouched down to look at it. The fish had its eyebrows. He texted V. She put a fish in the corner. V replied, "Of course she did." Then, Don't paint over it. Wasn't planning to, he said. The center opened in the first week of August, which was not dramatic or ceremonious in the way that things on the news are. No ribbon cutting, no press coverage that anyone sought out. They opened the door at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and the kids came in the way kids come into new spaces, which is cautiously, and then all at once. 8 the first day. 14 by Friday. The single mother from Logan's building brought her 2 kids on Wednesday and stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the main room. The repainted walls, the low tables, the shelves with the books and the art supplies, the corner with the fish no one had painted over, and pressed her mouth together briefly in the way that means something has reached a place you weren't expecting it to reach. Logan was at the front desk when she came in. He showed her around himself. The after-school area, the small kitchen where kids got snacks, the reading corner that Maisie had unofficially designated as the whale section because she had donated 3 ocean books to it and felt this gave her naming rights. "It's real," the woman said. "It's real," Logan said. "How long is it going to last?" "As long as we run it right," he said. "Which is the plan?" She nodded. She enrolled both kids. She shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who has learned not to rely on things and is choosing to rely on this one anyway, which he understood completely. The summer had a quality that Logan thought about later when he tried to describe it and couldn't quite find the right frame. Not perfect. Nothing about it was perfect. The licensing board sent 3 rounds of revision requests. One of the early staff hires didn't work out and they had to navigate that with care. The floors in the back room turned out to have a water damage issue under the surface that cost more to fix than they'd budgeted and required 2 weeks of construction that pushed the full opening back. V and Logan had 2 more arguments, one about how much operational control she was actually comfortable handing over, which was a real tension that required real conversation to work through, not a clean resolution, but an ongoing negotiation that they were both willing to keep doing. One about a decision he made without consulting her that affected the funding structure, which she had been right to flag, and he had been too proud about initially, and which took him 2 days to come around on fully. They worked through both of them without anyone walking away, which Logan had learned was the actual standard for whether something was working, not the absence of friction, but the presence of enough respect to stay in the friction until it resolved. The apartment on Cassidy Street was still his. He hadn't moved, hadn't suggested moving, wasn't sure of the timeline on any of that. V's apartment on Meridian Avenue was different now. She'd made the changes on her list. There were things on the walls that she'd chosen because she liked them. The kitchen had evidence of actual use, of the scrambled eggs in their various iterations, of the pasta and the attempts at bread that had been interest-eating and the soup that had been genuinely good. There was a paperback on the coffee table with a cracked spine. It didn't look like a hotel anymore. It looked like someone lived there who had decided to be present in their own life. She spent Sundays on Cassidy Street as a standing thing. Sometimes she stayed over on the couch. They hadn't rushed the rest of it, were not in the habit of rushing things. And sometimes she left after Maisie was in bed, and sometimes she was there for breakfast, which Maisie treated as entirely normal, because Maisie had decided the arrangement was correct, and therefore it was. One evening in late August, a Sunday, warm enough that they had the kitchen window open and the sounds of the street came in alongside the early evening light, Maisie came out of the bathroom in her pajamas and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, to no one in particular, "I have a question." "Okay," Logan said. Maisie looked at V, who was sitting at the kitchen table with her notebook and a pen, working on something that was probably the center's fall programming schedule and possibly her own list again, the two having developed a tendency to overlap. "Are you going to be here forever?" Maisie asked. V put down the pen. Logan leaned against the counter. Maisie was looking at V with the clear, uncomplicated directness that she used when she was asking something she actually needed the answer to. No performance, no test, just a question. "I want to be," V said. She said it steadily, looking at Maisie directly. "That's what I'm trying to figure out how to do." "You don't have to figure it out," Maisie said, with the reasonable impatience of someone who has already done the analysis and found it simpler than the adults are making it. "You just stay." A silence settled in the kitchen, not an empty one. V pressed her lips together briefly. Then she said, You make it sound easy. It is easy, Maisie said. You stay, and then it's the next day and you're still here, and then it's easy. She delivered this with the absolute confidence of someone whose understanding of permanence was built from the things that had actually stayed in her small life. Her father's presence every morning, the fish on the tile, the ocean book, the Saturday window booth. Things that were constant, not because they were perfect, but because the people attached to them kept showing up. V looked at Logan across the kitchen. He was watching her face, which was doing the thing it did. The open thing, the thing that didn't try to go anywhere. He said nothing. He had learned when silence was the right thing and when it needed to be filled, and this was clearly the former. Okay, V said to Maisie, quiet. Then I'll stay. Maisie nodded in the decisive way, case made, case closed, and crossed the kitchen to the table. She picked up the pen V had set down, pulled the notebook toward herself, and drew a small whale in the margin of whatever page it was open to. You can keep working now, she told V. I added a whale for good luck. V looked at the whale. It was confident, forward-leaning, drawn with the same eyebrow placement technique as the fish on the tile. Thank you, V said. Her voice was steady. Everything else about her was less so, in the good way, in the way that means something has gotten through. You're welcome, Maisie said, and went to bed. Logan and V sat in the kitchen in the August evening with the open window and the street sounds and the notebook with the whale in the margin, and didn't say much for a while because the moment didn't need decoration. What Logan thought about in the weeks and months after, when he tried to find the shape of everything that had happened, from the rainy October night on Meridian Avenue to the February board meeting to the fish on the baseboard of the center's main room, was this. The thing that had changed his life was not a grand gesture or a dramatic reversal. It was a series of small, consistent choices. The choice to stop when he heard something fall. The choice to make soup without being asked. The choice not to take the money. The choice to tell the truth in 40 minutes on a Tuesday night. And on her side, the choice to sit in a cafe window booth and be a person rather than a CEO. The choice to give a child a book with something handwritten on the inside. The choice to stand in a stairwell and text the truth before she'd had time to edit it. None of those choices were clean. All of them were made by people who were tired and uncertain and carrying things and not entirely sure of what they were doing. The choices didn't come from a position of strength. They came from a position of, this is what seems right, even though the ground isn't steady. He thought about what Maisie had said, you just stay, and how the simplicity of it was not naivety. She wasn't simple. She was clear. She'd had 4 years of watching her father choose to stay in the hard thing rather than find a way around it, and she'd built her understanding of love on that, and she'd recognized it when she saw it in someone else. The center on Alderman Street ran its first full fall session with 23 enrolled children and a waiting list of 11 more. Logan ran the operations, hired the staff, made the decisions that needed making, and deferred on the ones where he needed the deferral. V consulted, as promised, efficiently, without overreach, knowing when to push and when to let him figure it out. They argued about 2 things in September and resolved both of them by the following week. On a Friday evening in October, almost exactly 1 year from the night Logan had stood in the rain outside the Alderton building with a plastic-wrapped package under his arm, he locked up the center and stood on Alderman Street in the early dark autumn evening and looked at the building that had been a dental office and was now something else. Through the window he could see the main room, the tables and the shelves and the corner with the whale section and the baseboard fish in its confident posture. The lights were still on inside, the warm kind, the kind that made the window glow from the street. He thought about all the things he couldn't have told you 12 months ago were coming. The board meeting and the statement and the olive oil and the burned eggs and the list in a notebook and the woman who stood in a stairwell and told the truth before she could edit it. The whale in the margin. The moment in the kitchen when a 6-year-old said, you just stay, and solved in one sentence what 2 adults had been carefully circling for months. He thought about what it meant to belong somewhere, not to belong to a place. The center wasn't his. The apartment on Cassidy Street wasn't his. The window booth at Birch and Brew wasn't his in any legal sense. But to belong in the sense of, this is where the real things are. This is where the unmanaged version of your life is happening. This is where the people who know the actual you are. You spent a lot of your life, Logan thought, building toward a life. Getting through the current thing so you could get to the next thing. Working the route to pay the rent, to keep the lights on, to get Maisie to school, to get back on the route. The conveyor belt of maintenance. And somewhere in the machinery of all that, you forgot that the life wasn't waiting at the end of the conveyor belt. The life was what was happening in the kitchen at 6 in the evening and on the Saturday walk to the farmer's market, and in the 40 minutes you spent writing the truth on your phone in the middle of the night. It wasn't a lesson he could package neatly. He was 32 years old and still figuring it out in real time, still making the wrong call sometimes, still short-tempered on bad weeks and uncertain about things he probably should have sorted out by now. V was still learning to burn the eggs on low heat instead of high. Maisie was still going to be a complete unknown at 16. None of it was going to be smooth. None of it had ever been smooth, and that wasn't going to change because of a good October or a board meeting that went the right way or a center with warm lights on Alderman Street. But here was what was also true. The fish was on the baseboard. The whale was in the notebook margin. The woman he loved had stood in a stairwell and told the truth before she could stop herself. And he was going home now to a kitchen where she was probably burning something, and his daughter was telling her exactly what was wrong with the technique. And tomorrow was Saturday, and Birch and Brew would have the window booth and Rose's Jazz and whatever new thing Maisie had decided needed to be drawn. Some things you build. Some things you find by accident in a rainy stairwell with a plastic-wrapped package and the presence of mind to stay a few minutes longer than your job required. The real ones, Logan had learned, felt like both at the same time. He turned off the light in the center window, locked the door behind him, and walked home through the October dark, hands in his jacket pockets, the city doing its ordinary evening thing around him, alive and loud and largely indifferent and entirely beautiful, the way it always was when you were moving through it toward someone who was waiting.